So I am pleased to present our first speaker, Dr. Patton. Dr. Patton graduated from UC Irvine School of Medicine. He earned a dual degree, MB and MBA, and went to complete an intern year at UC Irvine, preliminary medicine. He also completed his anesthesia residency at Stanford and is currently a regional anesthesia and acute fellow. And so, among other things, Dr. Patterson is heavily involved in mentorship and believes strongly in ensuring that one's gifts, talents, and success are used to help the disadvantaged and/or next generation recognize their potential. So we will be hosting our first workshop here titled What Black Lives Means to Me.
So as mentioned, yes, I'm a regional anesthesia fellow currently in Los Angeles, California, back home in LA. I'd like to give a special shout out to my Lakers and Dodgers for pulling off a victory in such a crazy year. But we'll go ahead and talk about what Black Lives Matters means to me now. So Black Lives Matter, I mean, we're all familiar with this term now. Black Lives Matter was started by these three women here, Alicia Garza, Patrisse Cullors, and Opal Tometi. And it was developed throughout 2013 and 2014, mostly in response to what happened, back with Trayvon Martin and how he was gunned down by George Zimmerman. And so this organization has now become a huge global network with more than 40 chapters. And we'll go on and talk a lot more about the Black Lives Matter group. But in order for us to really understand what Black Lives Matters actually is all about and why it's important for us to continue to fight for minorities, you really have to go back and revisit history. So I don't want to make this a lecture. I don't want this to be boring. I want it to be very engaging and for it to be a big discussion between all of us, so that more voices are heard. But I do think it is important to take a little bit of time to go over some of the history here. So, as y'all know, slavery started back in 1619. And we all learned about slavery in school, but unfortunately what we learn about in school is oftentimes watered down and doesn't really paint such a great picture in terms of really the hardships and struggles that we as a community have experienced for now over 400 years, and why slavery has really very much so roots and ties to modern day anti-Black racism. So, we have slavery from 1619 to 1865, then followed by Jim Crow, then followed by redlining and segregation, and now we're in the era of mass incarceration. So essentially, systemic racism or slavery, even though slavery ended, quote unquote, in 65, which we know with the Emancipation Proclamation, it took about 2.5 years after that before all the slaves were truly freed, which we'll talk about. It's been hidden in disguise in other ways, and basically has continued on in other ways, and it's continued to marginalize our community, our Black and brown communities. So let's see here. So there's the Abraham Lincoln as he's signing the Emancipation Proclamation, as I've already discussed. So Juneteenth, as mentioned, Juneteenth is a day that we celebrate, as our Black community celebrates every year, because this is the day that actually, quote unquote, the slaves were free. The last remaining slaves in Texas were actually freed. When General Gordon Granger rode into Galveston, Texas, and announced that the war had ended and slaves were free. So the Civil War, another thing that a lot of people don't realize is, we always talk about it's a fight between the North and the South, but it was a war that centered on slavery. It was actually a war that was started because of slavery and wanting to end slavery. And so I just want to make sure that that's known. And there's obviously economic and many other reasons for why slavery existed and why we still have these issues, as I've already discussed, in terms of mass incarceration and whatnot. And so after Juneteenth, and slaves were freed, we then entered into the era of Jim Crow, which were laws that were enacted after the Civil War ended. And it basically, the Jim Crow laws were enforced by police, of course, and they maintained the slavery racial hierarchy. So I mention that because we have a big issue right now with police brutality, obviously, and there's many protests that have continued to happen over the course of time here because of the the way that the Black and Brown community is treated by police officers. And one thing to note is that police officers has its origin in slave patrols, which slave patrols existed back during slavery, and their whole purpose and function was to maintain order and to basically keep slaves from organizing and rebelling. And these individuals were primarily white Caucasian males. And so the modern day municipal police departments started after slave patrols, and many of those individuals who were involved in slave patrols actually became police officers. So you can imagine how this would continue to allow for discrimination and mistreatment, brutality, and you name it, against unidirectionally, enforced against the Black and Brown communities. And so here's a picture of Martin Luther King, and you can see John Lewis to our right, but to his left there. And they were obviously speaking up, and very much so big voices in the civil rights era, trying to end segregation and to make things more fair and equitable for the Black and Brown community. And so John Lewis, he was willing to die for the Voting Rights Act, which he helped to get passed during the Civil Rights Movement. And so there's a big reason why individuals like John Lewis are celebrated, and why all of us felt deeply saddened when we lost him this year, because he was an instrumental figure in the Black community. And so you see here President Obama and John Lewis holding his hand. They're taking the same walk here through Selma that they took back back in the 60s here. This was just recently, within the last decade. You see this is just amazing to see how many people obviously came out for this, but like the symbolism behind this and what this all means, especially in times like today, that when we're dealing with what we're dealing with in 2020. But this is interesting here. So John Lewis, as we know, he passed in 2020. Mitch McConnell actually said this, fairly shortly after he passed, and said there's very little tangible evidence of this whole voter suppression nonsense that the Democrats are promoting. And the reason why he said this is because there was a Supreme Court decision that invalidated a portion of the Voting Rights Act that effectively allowed the government to regulate new election laws. And this happened, about 7 or 8 years ago. And so essentially what it did is it eliminated polling locations in many southern states, which we know have a well-documented of discrimination. And other things that it did was it shortened voting hours, enacted new barriers to registration, reshaped voting districts, made stricter voter identification laws, and actually closed some of the polling places. So who do you think was going to be greatly impacted by these changes? Of course, the Black and Brown community, was and has been. And the reason why this statement was made is because, to honor John Lewis, there was a big push to try and get these to get the provision back so that we can eliminate these things that continue to hold our communities back and make it difficult for us to obviously vote and have our voices be heard. And I don't want to, only make this a political thing in the terms of it being one-sided and only really bring up what the Republican Party has done and how they've contributed to, the issues that we experience and things that we face as a Black community. This is President Clinton here, as we know, he's a Democrat. He signed the crime bill in 1994. This is actually when you talk about mass incarceration, which really got started back when Ronald Reagan was president, when he started to be harder on crime and in terms of the drug trafficking. President Clinton and the Democrats realized that the Republicans were continuing to win, and because they kept speaking about being hard on crime, and so they started to basically echo some of the same rhetoric, and it really surmounted to this crime bill being passed. And you can see here in 1992, there were 847,000 people in prison. By 2000, when President Clinton left, we were already up to 1.3 million. So it was something that really it was a bill that was passed, and it really came down hard on our community, unfortunately, as history as people always say, history repeats itself. Anytime stuff like this, comes about, it's always our community that gets ostracized and gets unfairly mistreated in terms of representation. And so, this bill had the COPS program attached to it, which provided federal money to states to increase police officers patrolling in the streets. You have more police officers in the streets, you have more arrests, you have more people who are going to be incarcerated, obviously. And I won't spend too much time talking about things like the fact that prison systems are privatized, so there's obviously incentives for them to be full, and also that there's companies that utilize prison labor to increase their profits. These are all things that are being discussed now because of this Netflix documentary 13th has really shed light on a lot of these issues and sort of brought it to the periphery and forefront for a lot of us who may have no idea, about some of these things that I've been discussing. And I highly recommend you all watch this video if you haven't watched it yet. It's on Netflix, a documentary. Same person who directed Selma is the person who directed this film or this documentary. And there are people from both sides. Again, it's supposed to be, unbiased in terms of representations. You have Democrats, you have Republicans, you have people for, against, various different voices. But it really helps you understand and opens your eyes to exactly why we're in the position that we're in today. And it goes all the way back from the beginning, as I mentioned earlier in my discussion, to where we are now in terms of mass incarceration and police brutality. So let's fast forward. So here's a picture of Trayvon. I won't show the images that are more triggering. I want to try and make this a positive discussion, but we all know and we've all seen the images and videos of Black and brown people, men and women, who've been gunned down by police, essentially for doing nothing. I mean, nonviolent crimes, not holding weapons, just honestly for being Black and wearing a hoodie. It's been quite a time, for all of us who are obviously millennials and Zoomers, had not been around in the 60s and 70s. Obviously, we're experiencing this firsthand as young Black and brown women and men. And here's Michael Brown, following 2013, Michael Brown 2014, which Black Lives Matter really started mobilizing after this one. And, the really sad thing about Michael Brown is, beyond the fact that he was gunned down by police, shot in the back, which, in all accords, he didn't have a weapon. There wasn't really anything that he was doing that really justified him being murdered. He was left in the street for hours before he was removed. And you can imagine how traumatizing it is for our community to continue to see these images and videos and hear these stories, but let alone to sit there and watch him just sit in the street for hours before he's removed is just it's just heavy. I'll just say that. And here's Breonna Taylor. We know her story. This is 2020 now. Ahmad Arbury. Ahmad Arbury was gunned down by gentlemen who are not police officers, and I think a few were retired police officers, but these are citizens that were supposedly, quote unquote, responding to something where they thought, he had committed a crime, and things escalated as he's jogging and exercising, and ultimately ended in him losing his life, unfortunately. And not only did he lose his life, but he lost his life, and they recorded it. And right now they're still actually going through the process of hearing this case to determine the fate of those three gentlemen. We'll see. We all know how these stories, unfortunately, and almost often, always, these police officers and individuals get off without really having any consequences come from it. So you get off. Not only do they get off, but they get to keep their pensions, they get to keep their jobs, get to keep their badges, keep their weapons. So it's again, this is a story that's been told over and over and over again. And then here's George Floyd, which really got things going, during this pandemic and this year, with regards to all the protests and not just U.S. or national, unrest and frustration with this, but globally, we've seen obviously a large amount of participation from individuals all around the world in terms of trying to speak up against systemic racism and really hoping to fight for, change at the end of the day. But usually when we have these protests, we see things like this. Unfortunately, I'll be the first one to admit, there's opportunists in any situation. There are going to be people who are going to try and take advantage of opportunities to, support or push their agenda, whatever that may be, on both sides. But in this situation, you have a situation where, for the most part, many, by all accounts of the protests that we're seeing around the country, are peaceful for the most part. You see this, though, unfortunately, the peaceful protests are met with force. And, I've already talked about, again, slave patrols, and how slave patrols' job was to basically keep slaves from organizing and trying to figure out ways to escape slavery or bondage, or rebelling. That was the whole purpose of slave patrols, and that led to municipal police essentially is doing the same thing. Their job at the time was not to fight crime. Their job was actually to keep order. So when you hear this law and order thing, this kind of brings you back. And you see images like this where a guy is sitting here, and he's not even a black guy. This is a Caucasian guy sitting here with his hands up, and he's being sprayed with pepper spray. The problem that we have, though, is let me go back. Actually, sorry, I was one slide ahead. This is John Lewis here again. So this is not something that just started in 2020 or just started with the protests after Michael Brown in 2014. This is John Lewis here being beaten with the Billy Club here as they're protesting for civil rights and marching for civil rights back in the 60s here. So you can see this is something that has repeated itself over and over and over again. And this is police department. These police officers, for the most part, are Caucasian. Almost all of them are Caucasian. And they're here beating John Lewis and others for protesting, and you can see here he has no weapons, at least that we can see, right? And there's no weapons anyone has. People are running for their lives and fearing for their lives. This is just another image that reminds us of where we are and where we were. But then you see stuff like this, where you have a militia group protesting stay-at-home orders out in Michigan. This is the state capitol here, and not only did they protest, but they actually threatened the governor, who is a Democrat. They threatened her life if she didn't change her stance on the stay-at-home orders that she was issuing in, trying to keep people safe and protected from this coronavirus. And so you see stuff like this, and these people are dubbed as heroes, and these people are looked at as doing good work. There's no police force that's being used to stop them. Not only are they mobilizing, but they're mobilizing with weapons, as opposed to seeing images like this, where you have folks that are sitting around, without having any weapon whatsoever, but they're being met with force and abused and beaten for protesting. And the Mikulski, I won't spend too much time here, but this is the McCloskeys, who walked out of their house. I just always laugh when I see her weapon, but walked out of their house. It's not a funny thing. They walked out of their house basically threatening protesters. And again, these people are dubbed as heroes. They're not seen as vigilantes or criminals, or whatever term you want to use to continue to ostracize our community or terrorize our community. They're not seen in the same light. And this is, again, just more of the same. And so this sign here, why did Jake get shot in the back while Kyle got a thank you, is in response to this. So this is Kyle Rittenhouse. There was a protest that erupted in Wisconsin after Jacob Black was killed. And this guy, Kyle Rittenhouse, crossed state lines with a weapon, as you can see here, 17 years old. Not only did he go into this protest and shoot people and walk away, but he was told before he actually committed these crimes by the cops that they were thankful that he was doing the work that he was doing. And you see things like this, and you hear stories about how people like him are given water and food and treated without being obviously having to be subjected to the abuse that we often communities from the police department, on our communities. And you see things like this and images like this, and it just really it makes you think, it makes you wonder, and it really makes you sad and angry and all kind of emotions, because you just wonder, like, how is it that this can continue to be okay? especially in an era that we live in now, where we can obviously record these things in real time and share them in real time, as opposed to before in the 60s, 70s, 80s, and even the 90s, when we didn't have HD and 4K quality cameras that can record these things and upload them directly to social media so that the world can see as it's going down. And here you go. So peace comes with law and order, and support police. Now, I'll be the first one to admit that I have friends and family who are police officers. I don't believe that all police officers are bad. That's always what's said. All police officers aren't bad. It's an interesting thing though when you start talking about stuff like Blue Lives Matter. Whenever Black people try, or the Black and Brown community tries to mobilize and have our voices be heard, whenever we have a grievance or something that we want to bring to light, there's always a response like this. But what about us? Never are we allowed to actually express ourselves in ways where people truly sit and listen to what it is that we have to say. There's always a, but what about us? When has there ever been a situation in this country, and I'm asking this rhetorical question, where police officers have been treated the same as the Black and Brown community? They've never been a minority. For the most part, they're still all, the majority white. Never have they been subjected to the same brutality that they subject, and again, I say they, not in terms of everyone, but this is a systemic issue. This is the issue that we're having. It's not an issue with individuals. It's an issue with the institution of policing, and it's a systemic issue. Never have they been treated the way that the system unfortunately treats our communities. But yet this again is something that repeats itself. You see here, this is the 1960s here. Southern whites are the Negro's best friend, but no integration. Essentially saying that we're willing to hear what you have to say, but we don't want to integrate. And the picture on the right, where are white civil rights? I mean, this is a time where, again, Black people are being lynched. Black people are being treated unfairly. You have peaceful protests, in terms of what, Martin Luther King and many of the civil rights activists were fighting for happening, and they're being met with hoses and dogs and being beaten. And so, you see these things like, where are white civil rights? There's never been a time in this country where whites have been treated in this way. So I don't want to make this just a Black and white thing, and I don't want people to leave this discussion having anger, animosity towards white people or to our white and Caucasian colleagues, because that's not the point of this. Again, this is a systemic, deeply rooted institutional problem that predates all of us. So it's something that we need to understand, that this is something that's been going on ever since we came to this country back in 1619. So over 400 years, we've been having this fight or this battle where we're trying to reach a more equitable state. And so you have peaceful protests from people, not just on the streets, who are the average common folks like you and I, but you have like celebrities and athletes like Colin Kaepernick, who took a knee, who was essentially banned from the NFL and received a lot of hate and ridicule for it because of being anti-American, or being, your protest is disrespectful to the flag, or all the other things that have been said. And you have Lebron James, who sat down with Kevin Durant on a segment, and he was talking about the social issues that Colin Kaepernick knelt for, and a Fox News anchor told him, or she tweeted at least, you need to basically shut up and dribble, and LeBron's response was, I will not shut up and dribble. So thank you, whatever her name is. I get to sit up here and talk about what's really important. So again, we try and speak up on these issues, and no matter who you are, lower socioeconomic to higher, your voice just continues to be suppressed. And people often assume that Black people like LeBron James, the reason why she said this, because he signed a $100 million contract and he's made a lot of money, that money and socioeconomic status somehow protects us from racism. It's far from the truth. And Dr. Brown will go on and talk about this. I won't use my time to talk about it, but he'll talk about how even as Black physicians, we experience racism and microaggressions and all kind of things that continue to make it difficult to see our people progress in their various different facets of society. And so 2020, it's been a heavy year. It's not just the police brutality and the racial tensions, but the coronavirus pandemic has also obviously gathered a lot of attention rightfully so, because of how it's basically stopped us in our tracks, and everything as we've known it has been changed maybe for forever because of this pandemic. But what's been really problematic is the pandemic has really impacted the Black and Brown communities very much more so than our majority communities. And so the CDC back in July, basically published this, and they started talking about the health equity considerations and racial and ethnic minority groups, and essentially trying to figure out why is it that Black people are being sickened by this virus more so than others. Why are we dying in high numbers more than others? And some of the things that they discussed were discrimination, healthcare access, utilization, occupation, educational, income, and wage gaps, and housing. There's many social economic determinants, to health, as we all know. But one thing that's really not talked about a lot is the fact that the Black and Brown community, unfortunately, has again suffered from mistreatment and unethical treatment by the medical community for years. I don't know if you're familiar with J. Marion Sims. He's known as the father of OB-GYN. And unfortunately, Dr. Sims, this is his statue that's being taken down in New York. Dr. Sims, a lot of the techniques and skills that he developed, he developed them by practicing on slaves, and so that's the reason why this statue was taken down, because there were a lot of protests for him being lauded and put on a pedestal here in New York. There are people who are upset by knowing obviously his history and his roots into slavery. You see here in NPR, Sims perfected a technique to repair fistulas, which are holes between the vagina and the bladder or rectum, and can lead to incontinence by repeatedly conducting painful experimental surgeries on enslaved Black women without using anesthesia. And so this is a picture of Dr. Sims here and one of the slaves that he's getting ready to essentially practice surgery on. And he wrote an autobiography, and he depicts some of the things that he did, and some of the things that he heard and experienced. And it's kind of hard, it's very difficult to sort of read and hear these things, because you're hearing about the women and how they were screaming in agony and whatnot, and they were of the mindset that they were being cured, and that this was actually ultimately going to lead to something good for them. But obviously we know now it's completely unethical to perform surgery without anesthesia and without consent, or to practice techniques on people who otherwise don't really, whose procedure doesn't or whose condition doesn't really call for the procedures that they're being subjected to. I'm not sure if you guys know what these are. I was going to ask it in a Q&A format, but I'll just go ahead and tell you. These are HeLa cells, and these HeLa cells are from Henrietta Lacks. So again, talking about how the Black community has issues or hesitances with trusting the medical community. Henrietta Lacks, her HeLa cells have been used in many different ways, and there's a lot of great discoveries that have come from them. But unfortunately, they were used without her consent or without her permission. Not only that, people have received Nobel Peace Prize for some of the discoveries, and her family hasn't received any compensation for any of the monies that for example, the HPV vaccine that these organizations or these corporations are pulling in significant amount of capital. They're not receiving anything from it. And so this is another example again of how our community continues to be used in ways that is completely different from the majority. Here's another image of the Tuskegee syphilis study. I think we're all familiar with this one. This study was undertaken over 40 years. And mind you, the cure, or not cure, the treatment for syphilis was found in the 1940s, which we all know is penicillin. But these gentlemen were subjected to this study, were not given penicillin for over 40 years. Even though they were told that this was actually going to be a study that was only going to be going on for 6 months, it went for 40 years. And so, this again, not fully consenting people, not doing what's ethically and morally right in terms of giving them the care that they receive. Which in any other circumstance, when there's a study that it shows efficacy for treatment, the study would be halted, and all those who are involved in the study would receive that treatment. These gentlemen were not given that liberty or benefit. And so let's just quickly go through these. So, you like John, but you're talking about things that happened a long time ago, but what about today? So this is Serena Williams, right? And Serena Williams, as we know, is very well endowed. She does very well for herself. She's an extremely gifted athlete, financially, stable. She has no issues in terms of, socioeconomic status. But Serena Williams and Beyonce have been very vocal and open about their problems that they experience in terms of their childbirth. And the reason why it's important to discuss these things, because Black pregnancies, and from industrialized nations, we as a country don't do very well compared to our colleagues in terms of maternal health. But it's really problematic for the Black and Brown community. As you can see here, we're 3 times more likely to die, in pregnancy and or after childbirth. 42.4 deaths per 100,000 pregnancies, and you can see that it's 13 for whites and 11.3 for Hispanics. So it's something that continues to, unfortunately, cause lots of question and concern, but yet not a lot has been done to change these statistics over time. And I won't read through all of this, but you can see here, this is one of the Black Lives Matters co-founders, and she was talking about this very thing. Never explained what he was doing to me in terms of the surgeon and emergency C-section she needed to have. And her mother had to scream at the doctors to get more pain meds. And she says here, think they're acting reasonably when Black people are advocating for our family. In terms of the white people, when they're advocating, they're acting reasonably. But when Black people are advocating for our families, we're complaining, we're being uppity. We don't know what we're talking about. We're exaggerating. And you can see here, this is a doctor over at Harvard T.H. Chan School of Public Health, essentially echoing the same thing. Basically, Black women are undervalued. They are not monitored as carefully as white women are. When they are present with symptoms, they are often dismissed. And so she's really, talking about it from a public health standpoint. Why is it that we're seeing these issues? I mean, obviously are multifaceted, very deeply rooted in systemic racism and other things. But there are many considerations for why this is a problem. But this is her quote, speaking about this issue. So I wanted to quickly go through this Business Insider. This you guys can check this article out and look at all the charts themselves. But this is really is something that was published, and I think it was a great article that was published in July, and it really did a lot of the work for me in terms of like revealing to us why systemic racism is still alive and well. So you see here, so fatal police shootings per million by race, and just look at the disproportionate representation of Blacks compared to whites and even Hispanics, right? So deaths per million. And so you look at that and you're like, okay, well, we know that more Caucasians are in prison than Blacks are in prison. True, but look at the difference in terms of the overall population. So 59% of the overall population in this country in these counties. Sorry, I'm looking at COVID. I just skipped a slide. This is COVID. So COVID hospitalizations, going back to COVID. So in the 99 counties in 14 states where they looked at the numbers and they're trying to figure out kind of what's going on from a racial standpoint in terms of the racial groups that are contracting the disease and the rates and whatnot. You can see here 59% of the county is represented by whites, but 45% of the hospitalizations are of Caucasian people. But here for the Blacks, 18% of the overall population, but we're representing 33% of the hospitalizations. And so it's not it's not that the virus is targeting the Black and Brown community because it has some sort of predilection for us, or it's has some racial bias towards us. There are many issues which we can discuss at a later time for why it is that Black and Brown individuals are being impacted heavily by this virus, more so than our Caucasian majority colleagues. And it comes down to systemic racism, as we talked about, segregation, redlining, what that actually has done to the community in terms of stripping our communities of resources, and the trust issues that we talked about with the medical community, people presenting to the hospitals or to their doctors late, even if they may not even have doctors late in the course of the disease process, and or being able to find testing centers. I mean, you name it, there's many issues. Wage gap between Black and white Americans. You can see here, Black annual income as a percent of white annual income, 59% back in 1967. We're at 62% in 2017, so not much better. Per capita income, Black and white Americans, You can see we've lagged behind for, the last 20 years. Household wealth, Black and white Americans from 1989 to 2019, $102 trillion for our Caucasian colleagues, $6 trillion for us. So household income versus overall poverty rate. So the reason why I'm talking about all this stuff in terms of poverty and socioeconomic status, because this has a big impact on health, as we all know. Excuse me. So real median household income, 70.6 thousand for whites, 41.7 thousand for Blacks. But the overall poverty rate, Blacks, overrepresented in the area of overall poverty rate, 20.7. Our Caucasian colleagues, 8.1. So you can see we have a lower real median household income, but higher overall poverty rates, which makes sense. Black women's annual, taking it further, Black women's annual earnings versus other races. White men, they're at 55.6 thousand. We're at Black women are at 66% of that, so 36.7 thousand. Ratio of imprisonment. So this is where I'm going with the prisons. Imprisonment rates of Black males to white males. You can see here, Black males are 18 to 19. Black males 18, 19 are 12.7 times more likely to be imprisoned than white males of the same age. And that's obviously very problematic, right? Once you're in the system, it's really hard to get out and quote unquote be free. I mean, you're in and out of prisons. You're in some instances not able to vote, and there's all kind of other things. And unfortunately, you have to succumb to in terms of because you have a record now that make it so that you are unable to live a truly free life once you're free. And we already talked about some of the reasons for why these prison systems or prisons remain filled. Sentence prisoners by race. You can see here, this is what I was getting to. So share of overall population, 60% of the overall population are Caucasian, but the share of prisoners, 30%. So our Blacks are represent around 12 to 13% of the country in terms of the census data, but 32.9%. So we're overly represented in prisons. And so almost done here. So this slide here, equality, equity, and liberation. Many don't really like this slide because the slide would suggest that Blacks or minorities, you can see here, are somehow you can see we're I don't want to use the word like midgets or smaller, but we unfortunately have some sort of reason for why we're maybe in this position that we're in. That the majority colleagues somehow are visually represented in a way that makes it seem as if like they're well endowed, they have better off. There's many other emotions and sentiments that come up when you see this image, but the reason why this image has been used is because it discusses the difference between equality and equity, and how essentially we need to treat people and give people need in terms of trying to reach a point of true equality or equity. We can't give everybody the same thing because we're not all starting at the same place. So when you think about Black Lives Matter and All Lives Matter, that's a discussion that a lot of people are having. All lives matter won't matter truly until Black Lives Matter, right? And when you're looking at marginalized groups, you can't look at that marginalized group and say, but what about me? When someone posted a picture that I saw, an emergency department, and Dr. Brown probably will laugh at this. When someone comes at to the emergency department with having symptoms or signs of a cardiac arrest or heart attack, we don't sit there saying, but what about the liver? So we need to really understand that, again, going back to the images that I showed you before, whenever we try to talk about trying to reach a more equitable state, there's always this pushback or hesitance to do so because of these distractions and or biases and any number of things that continue to hold us back. And liberation will be obviously moving the fence altogether. And so lastly here, so 5% of the physician workforce is African American. You can see 8.4% of the medical school applicants are African American. And this actually is hot off the press. So the appeals court upheld Harvard's affirmative action policy, which is constantly being battled, year after year, in terms of there are groups out there. This one primarily, Asian groups that were upset because they, and again, I don't want to make this about Asians versus Blacks, but upset saying that their policy, unfortunately, it causes us to be unfairly treated, because as you're making making it easier for African Americans to receive admission into Harvard, we're unfortunately going to lose out on spots when we're maybe more qualified. Take it a step further, if you make it so that we're looking at personality and some of these other qualities, there are racial stigmas in terms of Asians only being smart and or statistically acceptable. And so if we would lag in the areas of personality and whatnot, which would actually cause us to be unfortunately discriminated against, which the not Supreme Court, the state court didn't agree with them in this situation, and they ruled in favor of the policy. And so the AAMC is also trying, I'll let you guys read through this, also trying to obviously make statements on what they're planning to do. You all be very familiar with the AAMC. They have action plans. They have these 10 action steps that they're going to basically roll out, that it's going to help them in terms of addressing these issues. 4 of them are related to diversity. The NFL has since changed its stance on Colin Kaepernick's situation. Roger Goodell says here that teams, he encourages teams to consider bringing Colin Kaepernick on now. And in my group, in terms of Black Lives Matter, where's a group of Black physicians, and which Dr. Brown's and I speak regularly daily with these guys about various different issues that we've discussed today in terms of health disparities and whatnot. And we're all trying to use our voices and our platform, not just to obviously show us in terms of our successes and whatnot, but also trying to use our voices to help really enact change in this country. And now I want to say it's not our responsibility as Black and Brown people to solve the problems that have been plaguing us for centuries, but we do have a great opportunity right now to be active participants, and because right now companies and organizations, ones that we work for and others all over the world are listening, because the whole world has been stopped by this pandemic, and it has allowed us an opportunity that we haven't had really ever. In terms of trying to advance us forward. So this is Dr. Brown and I with one of our buddies, actually on a Zoom that we had a few days ago. And so you see here, this is some of the print that came, some of the posts that came out this year, Fox News, George Floyd senseless killing ends racism that afflicts America's soul like a cancer, essentially asking for the end of racism. This is Fox News. This one here in the middle really hits me. My daughter is 8. I'm explaining to her about George Floyd. When my son was 6, I was explaining Trayvon Martin. When I was 12, my mom was explaining Rodney King. When she was 6, her mom was explaining Emmett Till. It's tiring being Black in America. It's hard to put in words. As a Black physician, the things that we have to deal with in the hospital because of this pandemic is already stressful enough, and we're obviously experiencing a huge wave right now that's really looking quite dangerous for us in terms of the number of cases, the cases that are going up, as well as the death numbers that are coming in. The pandemic is nowhere near being controlled. We have that to deal with, but then we have all of this to deal with as well. So emotionally, you can see the stress that's placed on our community has a big implication as well on health, and people are now paying much attention to that. We start talking about why is it that Blacks and minorities have increasing rates of cardiovascular disease. Everyone wants to point to what we're eating, what we're doing in terms of drinking, smoking cigarettes, all that stuff. But what about the stress? What about the stress that our communities are being placed under, and the burden, that we shoulder from having to deal with stuff like this, and the trauma, that scars scars us, all the way to our core, to our souls, that we sort of walk around with. And so this was obviously a positive thing to see. You can see on the left, all of our vice presidents beforehand, for the most part, were white. There was one Native American, but you see here, to see a different face. And again, this is not about being Democrat or Republican, but it's just more or less highlighting that Vice President-elect Kamala Harris is an African American and Asian American female who's hopefully going to not be the last, that's going to be able to take office and represent us. So I just want to say thank you. I know I spoke a little bit longer than I wanted to. Hopefully we can have some questions here for a few minutes. There's my social media if you guys want to follow me on social media. But let's now open it up for discussion for a few minutes here.
Hi, Dr. Patton. I'm Melissa, VP of Mentorship for Me Mentor Southern California. I think we're going to hold off on questions till the end, if that's okay with you, so we can stick to the schedule and get on to Dr. Italo Brown.
Yeah, not a problem. Not a problem. I told Dr. Brown I didn't want to go too long, but I actually did. You know,
No worries.
Black folks know how to talk. I'll say that.
No, but
yeah.
thank you so much for educating us on the history of Black lives and giving us insight on the social injustices that the Black community goes through today in our society and in medicine. We really appreciate that. So hi everyone, like I said earlier, my name is Melissa. I'm VP of Mentorship for Mi Mentor Southern California, and I have the pleasure of introducing Dr. Italo Brown, MD, MPH, who graduated from Meharry Medical College in 2015. He trained at Jacobi Medical Center and Montefiore Medical Center, two Bronx hospitals ranked amongst the top 20 busiest ERs in the country. Currently, he's working at Stanford University School of Medicine as an assistant professor in emergency medicine and health equity and social justice curriculum. He is also the Chief Impact Officer of Trap Medicine, a barbershop-based wellness initiative that addresses the physical and emotional health of Black men and boys. You guys should definitely give him a follow on Instagram. Dr. Italo Brown continues to contribute to health equity, diversity, and inclusion. He will be presenting our next workshop called My Story as a Black Physician.
What's up, y'all? This is pretty cool, man. I really enjoyed listening to John's lecture. It's so much, the fact that there is historical evidence and context to a lot of the things that we're seeing now is exciting. And I hope that you all kind of took that from his conversation. Excellent. So I have 40 minutes with you guys. I'm going to try to keep it to 35 and have a conversation. My presentation style, I do like PowerPoints, but I try to save the PowerPoints for when I'm in particularly settings where I can't be 100% myself and I struggle to get to that level of comfort. But with you all, I feel like we're family. So I'm going to go ahead and have a conversation with you all that's very candid, open, and real. And before I go further, I have to start off by saying that I usually give trigger warnings in the beginning of these talks because there are certain things that people can say and share. And although for me, it doesn't necessarily incite certain feelings the way they once did, I may share it with you and it triggers something. So just understand that there's parts of my conversation today that you may find a little bit triggering. And I want you to know that this is a safe space. The other thing that I want to say outright is that I'm going to use terms that don't necessarily highlight the best faces in our America in the right way, because there have been historical, contextual reasons why these words exist. And then my last part is anything that I say today, if it is found offensive, if you feel that there's a hint of bias, I encourage you to educate me. Please reach out to me, educate me so that I can learn, because this is a constant growing process. And as we try to break down a lot of these things that are essentially affecting the way that we deliver medical care and the way that we treat each other as humans, we're going to make mistakes. So just know that that's where I'm coming from. It's a place of love, a place of genuineness. And without further ado, I just wanted to thank Mi Mentor for really making this platform. It's such a profound thing to see people of color creating resources and being a body that is trusted and that people can come to for insight. So I wanted to say, my conversation is built around this idea of my story as a Black physician, but I'm not unique in that regard. My story is the story of tons of other physicians who have gone through things and who have endured just to be able to sit in front of someone and say, I am your provider. I'm someone that can care for you optimally. There's a ton of different snags and a bunch of things that we go through that some individuals will never see. And that's what my goal is today, is to share some of those things with you. So I want to start with a quote from an author named Ta-Nehisi Coates. He has a book He has several books. This one is from his first piece, and the quote is as follows. "So I feared not just the violence of this world, but the rules designed to protect you from it. The rules that would have you contort your body to address the block, and contort again to be taken seriously by colleagues, and contort again so as to not give the police a reason. All my life, I've heard people tell their Black boys and Black girls to be twice as good, which is to say, except half as much. These words would be spoken with a veneer of religious nobility, as though they evidence some unspoken quality, some undetected courage, and when in fact, all they evidenced was the gun to our head and the hand in our pocket. This is how we lose our softness. This is how they steal our right to smile." This quote stood out to me because it basically speaks to the journey that a lot of physicians of color go through. And I'm going to come from the perspective of a Black male. I was born and raised in Sacramento, California. There's a lot harder places in California, but I grew up in a place where I'm on the South Side. My parents are from Detroit, Michigan. I didn't wear red until I was in college. Let's just say that. There were colors that were off limits for me as a young man. And in having to navigate life as a Black kid in a place where you're trying to find your identity, you're trying to understand that you can be both a scholar and you can be cool. You can be intelligent, but you could also appreciate music. Like, getting that type of well-roundedness is not championed. And then there's the real obvious things, such as not having physicians to look at, not having examples of people that I could go to. I couldn't walk up to my dad. My dad had a high school education. This dude spent most of his time pouring iron as a young man, and going up to him and saying, "Hey, Pops, I'd like to be a physician." That was going to be, he'll tell me I could do it, but he didn't have much for me. He didn't have any friends he could refer me to and tell me, just stay along the path. They didn't even know the path. It was never covered. My mom was an English teacher, which is kind of cool because that's part of the reason why I can write and speak with confidence, is because as a young person, she had me reading Catcher in the Rye. She had me reading all of these, classic literature, as well as reading Langston Hughes and Richard Wright, and going through multiple different types of literature so that I could at least know who I was. So I was thankful for that. But even still, college education, continued to teach underserved kids, didn't have any friends who were physicians. And the only reason why I went into medicine to begin with was because she made a joke. She was we were talking about athletes, and I wanted to play basketball. I was like, man, I'm gonna be a hooper. And like most, come on now, most young kids who see what they see when they grow up, is like, I want to do that. And I wanted to hoop. And so I knew I wasn't gonna get much taller than 5'11", maybe 6 feet. I looked at my dad and I said, all right, we're just gonna cap out right here. So I was very, very self-aware at like 12, 13. And my mom goes, you can still make it to every game if you're like a team doctor. And I was like, oh, well, what they do, And so she started to explain to me that you could be a physician with the team. You get intimate contact with the game. You can be around the athletes. You travel with them. And I was like, yeah, that's for me. I'm there. And that's how I started my journey on wanting to be a physician. School was pretty easy to me. I'm not going to lie to you. I was one of those kids that things came quickly. I worked hard, but it wasn't anywhere near what I would say, like what the work required. I was the guy that, all right, I will touch the book and like by osmosis, the material just leaned into my mind and I would just remember it. I did that all throughout high school. And I was a very passionate advocate for human rights and particularly African-American rights, because my dad, what he lacked in educational knowledge, he made up for it in being self-taught and being somebody who owned his heritage. So while my dad didn't get college education, he would sit me down on Saturday mornings and have conversations with me about Egypt Egyptology, talk to me about Kemet, talk to me about Isis, Osiris, Horus, give me the entire lay of the land. And I knew how to write hieroglyphics and stuff as a child. This is something that my dad taught me. It had nothing to do with understanding physics, understanding, calculus. With that said, I went into college at Morehouse College, and this was a blessing in disguise. I only went there because I said, I need to know more Black people who are doing things that are positive than the brothers that I necessarily hung around with. I had friends that were not, that had kids by the time I finished high school. I had friends who never finished high school, friends who were selling everything you could think of and asking me to help do their math. You know what I mean? So I needed to be around people who inspired me. And I went to Morehouse. This is a historically Black college for those who are on the thread. Now, Morehouse was one of those places that the moment I set foot on the campus, I felt a different energy, y'all. Like I felt the type of energy that I had been missing. It was distinct, because not only was I somewhere where there was tons of Black men who were trying to better themselves, but there was a legacy of that. Martin Luther King had him already there. Benjamin Elijah Mays was a president. He poured into so many people and became one of the hallmark speakers that gave insight to the civil rights movement. I had Ralph David Abernathy. I had so many different people that I could just off the top of my head speak about as Morehouse men, that it made me feel the richness of the campus. But it was super competitive. And I was worried about that because I had never had to perform like this before. I struggled because I did not realize what I was capable of. I was learning the wrong way. I had to relearn how to actually study. I had to learn how to apply myself, how to build schedules. All of these things happened. And eventually I was in a position where I wanted to apply to medical school. Now, the part of my story that's uncomfortable is the failures, right? And a lot of these failures were built out of a few things. One, as I said, lack of exposure. And I want you to keep that in your mind as I go through when I get to the meat and potatoes of our conversation today. Lack of exposure. Also, the leaky pipeline, meaning at parts there was where I needed guidance, where I needed mentorship, I didn't have it. All right. And then there's a systemic element, a structural and a systemic racist element that comes with trying to apply to higher education and trying to get into higher education. So we'll talk about that in a few minutes. If any of you guys have ever seen anything that I've put online or listened to any of my lectures or anything like that, one of the main pieces people will say is, oh, you're the failure guy. You're the guy who had 140 rejections to medical school. And that, yeah, I'm him. I'm that guy. I'm the one who applied for 3 different cycles, had over 140 rejections, never was given a medical school interview, and found a way to get into a system that was never built or designed to accept someone who came from backgrounds like mine or like yours. And I'm going to tell you about that. So one of the greatest hurdles that comes with being a person of color, specifically a Black male trying to pursue medicine, is confidence. Simply confidence. How do you build it? Where does it come from? Do you remember the exact moment where you felt confident? It's hard. It's very difficult. I remember that I had to literally go through layers of my life to see where confidence developed. Because you can think of more threats to your confidence than actually where it started and how it is refluxed. Some of these threats to your confidence are very blatant, and some of them are racially charged. I remember when I was in Boston, I went to grad school in Boston, and there was a conversation I had. This is around the time where I had just applied my first time, been rejected to about 60 schools. And I went and talked to a guidance counselor. I said, listen, this dude was at Boston University. And I told him, I was like, I want to be a physician. and I need to know how to do it. And he looked at my scores, he looked at my GPA, and he said, you need to consider thinking about being like a science teacher. I said, what? Like a science teacher, why? And then he continued to tell me that this was not going to be a reality. And it really took a second for me to understand that he never even saw me. He saw numbers. He saw somebody who had hit multiple hurdles and didn't think that I'd ever, like, you would have to be the most pristine candidate of color just to get a nod. And I was nowhere near pristine. That happened multiple times along the route. And then the last part of it was literally taking exams that I felt were culturally insensitive, that I didn't have the same exact access to things. Imagine trying to get access to study materials, but no one can tell you the study materials that you need. And then when you try to get those materials, you have to work harder to get them. You have to have a second or a third job to make the money to pay for these things. So all of these types of barriers exist. And as a person of color, it affects you differently than it affects someone who has a lineage of physicians, someone who has family members with disposable income. That's not the same thing for me or you. When I was in that place, I had 2 jobs. I had to keep a third job just to pay for these expenses. At the same time, my family was fragmented. My dad had to be relocated to Southern California. He was still a part of my family, still married to my mom, but because where his base was, it closed. Now there were 4 different households. My sister in New Orleans came to live with me because of Katrina. And then my household, my dad and my mom. These are sincere constraints on the way that people have access to resources. And I know that I was better off than most people. So when you think about these barriers, it can't just be as simple as saying, go get the materials, go register for the test. You'll be able to do it. So this is a part of that journey. I'm coming upon my personal 10-minute mark where I said I'm going to transition to the next part. I'll say this lastly. There is a reason why you have about 4% to 5% of all physicians being Black. There's a reason why the trend line for African-American men entering medicine has a downward slope from 1978 to about 2016. It's because of issues like these, where there is lack of mentorship, where there are people who are facing significant barriers. And there's very few people that you can turn to who have evidence of how to get over this. Though every time you bring it up, people think that you're making it up. I know that you all see me today as a physician that has made it. I don't think that that's it at all. I think what you see is a reflection of yourselves. It's somebody who has perseverance, somebody who didn't take no for an answer and continue to drive and continue to work hard. But that wasn't met without resistance. There's 4 things that I wanted to talk about specifically, and I promise you I'll get out of you guys' hair for today. Implicit bias, microaggressions, imposter syndrome, and code switching. These 4 things I wanted to talk about, and I'm going to use elements of my life and my story to paint the pictures so that you have a very palpable and real thing to hang on to, okay? So the first one I said was implicit bias. Now, this is my experience throughout the entire spectrum, the continuum of education that led to me now where I work at Stanford, right? So implicit bias. This very loosely defined is when people have preconceived judgment about an individual, about something that's not supported by fact. It's simply a judgment that they're placing. And sometimes it's not something that they are completely aware of, okay? Now, the way that we typically think about implicit biases are, if I go to, let's say, I'll give you a very perfect example. If someone right now came to my house and I had music playing, 9 times out of 10, I'm not gonna be playing country music. I am implicitly biased towards hip hop, rap, trap music because I love it. It's something that I kind of think about. Every day I wake up, it's on my mind, right? And my world consistently revolves around this type of feeling. Now, there are people whose worlds revolve around white male heteronormativity. And that's a big word that basically means that the dominant culture is driven and created and made to sustain the fragility of certain white male ideologies. It's built to make sure that there is a white male dominance. And if you are in that space and you've lived in that space, it's very easy when you see somebody who is not like you to other them, meaning to make sure that they are not exactly like you. This is what you feel when you are a medical student and you are told by your physician, by your attending, to go in and see a patient. And you go in and see that patient and the patient says, I want to see another doctor. This happened to me. The crazy part is, like I said, I trained in two of the most racist places in the US. I trained in the Northeast, and specifically in Boston, and I trained in Nashville, Tennessee, which is the South, below the Mason-Dixon. It was so stark in terms of environments. When I went to Boston for the first time and a guy straight up called me an N-word on the train, I said, wow, this is Boston. And then I got back to Nashville a few years later, and a car drove by me on the second weekend that I was there, and someone yelled out, "Nigger!" And I was like, welcome to the South. With that said, I walked into a patient room, and the guy said, I don't want no monkey doctor. And naturally, my reaction was partially like taken aback, but I'm so quick-witted that I said, well, I don't treat monkeys. And I continued to see the patient, but that left like this burn mark on my soul. And it's rooted in the patient's implicit bias. He thought that people of color couldn't be physicians, thought that people of color weren't intelligent enough to do the job. The back end part of that implicit bias is when I told my attending was like, you got to get used to it. These are real examples of things that happen. Implicit bias is when you go to, when you try to excel and something is there that you had no awareness of, and it holds you back. I think that people will be less likely, people of color are less likely to be promoted because of implicit bias. Our exams that we take have implicit bias in them and how they're structured. And this is what you experience at various points. Microaggressions, these are the things that a lot of people see and know are like, they irk you, they like little thorns in your side, and you can't figure out why they exist and why people would think that way. Microaggressions are when you, when a person comes into your space and because you have long hair, they just decide to touch it. You walk in and just like, oh, this is nice. And just grab your locks, grab your natural hairstyle. They are, when you are in the same room as a medical student and you are an attending or a fellow, and they address the medical student because the medical student is a white male. It is constant. It is something that you will always see. And my experience with microaggressions has been rooted in the fact that I'm a Black male with long hair. I've literally been told in 3 or 4 different places along my career to cut my locks. Suggested, not told outright, but just like, oh, you ever thinking about like, changing it up? Microaggression. Don't you think that you got interview season coming and a little bit more professional, cleaner look may get you a better job? Microaggression. These articulate your entire walk. Imposter syndrome. This is the belief that specifically you are not qualified. And it's not rooted or based in anything significant. It's just the fact that you are so used to being counted out, so used to having to work twice or three times as hard just to be considered equal, that you consciously don't have a degree of confidence when you enter a situation and you believe that you don't belong there, despite being adequately qualified and having the same degree of accolades as the other people who are there. This is what happens when you go from a place where they nurture your intellect and your ability, and then you transfer into something like a predominantly white hospital or medicine in general. And people continue to remind you that, oh, you know, you're our diversity. That feeds into imposter syndrome. I felt personally imposter syndrome when I came to Stanford. I said, man, this is Stanford. Everybody here is intelligent. Man, I gotta work. I gotta keep working. I gotta keep grinding. Not realizing that I was there because I deserved to be there, right? So we'll come back to imposter syndrome. And then finally, code switching. Code switching is something that most of us know how to do and have learned as a survival tactic. You don't realize it. It's the fact that you make small, minor changes to your personality just so that you can be considered one of them or blending in. The minor changes of octave in your voice when they come in the room and they say, hey, Italo, you say, hey, Jim, you're like, I don't even talk like that. Well, why did you do it? Because you're code switching. It's the decision to feel uncomfortable space with small talk about things that you're not even interested in. It's the subtle urge to want to learn everything that you can about hobbies that you have no sheer interest in. Why am I learning things about hiking that I've never really thought about? Why am I trying to rock climb on weekends? I've never really wanted to do those things. Well, you're doing it so you can adapt better. You're trying to assimilate, and it's subconscious. But the reason why is because all evidence points to people who are liked are more likely to excel. And you just being yourself may not be enough for somebody to give you a second shot or the optimal shot or to hire you or to promote you. You end up having to play the game. And that's code switching. All of these things that I've stated here they are inextricably linked to the Black experience or the person of color experience in medicine. You see implicit bias daily. You understand that feeling. As I say, you walk into a patient's room and then you realize that the patient would prefer to have somebody other than you, right? You see the microaggressions daily. Walk into that same room and they assume you're not the doctor. They say, hey, here's my tray. Can you please take that away? I'd like to have a coffee next. Imposter syndrome. When you return to the room with your colleagues and you've gone through all of these things, and then someone asks you a question, a medical question, and then before you even start to talk, they say, oh man, we should probably let him just hang out over there for a second. He just got through seeing a tough patient. And then code switching is you respond and say, oh, all the patients are tough. Simple arc. So like I said, I could do this for a bunch of different examples, but what I'd like you to know from me sharing these things is that a lot of these problems are rooted in what I would consider to be structural and systemic racism, right? It's woven into medical culture. John talked about a lot of it. It's the reason why BMIs are based off of white male medical students. It's the fact that our understanding of GFR, our understanding of pulmonary function tests are all based on certain things that are racist. Even the simple fact that every single hospital that you step foot in, for the most part, is named after or echoes white majority culture. These things are real. And I just want you to be aware of them as you try to navigate through this. So the question becomes, how do you, with all of this that you are fighting against, how do you do it? How do you make it? First things first, you have to own your narrative. have to own it. It can't just be something that you hold as a blemish. It is you. It is your identity. Own that thing. And there's incredible power once you just accept that every single day when you show up, you are exactly who you are, because you can go to sleep with that person. You can wake up with that person and still feel the same degree of passion and comfort. Just knowing that I am who I am 100% of the time. The second thing is, 1,000 times a day, if you have to, take a second and just say, I am enough. I am enough. Just me. I'm enough in this space. I'm in this space as the only Black doctor. I'm in this space as the only female. I'm in this space as the only person who identifies as LGBTQIA, whatever your specific thing is that is your narrative and that helps you define yourself. You're enough. And I say, you have to open as many doors as you can. You came through some type of hole, some type of window, some type of door. Make it wider, blow it apart, however you can, because there's other people who are waiting on that same type of opportunity. And just because you can't have the opportunity, the second to turn around and see everybody who is looking at you and saying, man, I want to be just like them, doesn't mean they're not looking. They are. And so you have to make that space wider. You have to make that space more sensitive to who you are, to that identity, to that narrative, because as you continue to strive for excellence, people will make note that this is not common. This is unique, and it is worth something. That value is there because you exude the value, and it's not something that's unnatural, it's 100% natural. So think about those things as you try to navigate these issues. I promise you there is a task force of individuals who are trying to fight systemic and structural racism, who are doing the education of our colleagues on implicit bias, microaggressions, and we are continually teaching each other how to deal and battle imposter syndrome. We go through lectures about this. We make it normal to have this type of festering anxiety just to be a person of color in a space that doesn't seem to want you. And I play trap music on my shifts. I talk exactly how I talk right now. I am done with always code switching. I think that my code is perfectly fine enough. So my journey and my story as a Black physician is simply the story of our ancestors, people who were rich in culture, rich in heritage, rich in their desire to be trendsetters, whether they knew it consciously or not, and resilient. And so as I continue to be a physician, my job is to make sure that you all are unlocked in the same capacity. I know that the time is coming, so I want to just close out with one quote from Denzel Washington. He's a phenomenal actor, and I like this part because of the main premise. He said, without commitment, you'll never start. But more importantly, without consistency, you'll never finish. Ease is a greater threat to progress than hardship. So I'd like to open it up for questions. We can talk very casually right now, but those are some of my reflections.
I have a question for you, Dr. Brown.
What's up?
Hi, my name's Taylor. I'm the VP of Outreach for the NorCal region.
Fantastic.
I've seen a lot of your talks.
I'm a
oh yeah, right here. I work
at
Stanford. I'm a huge fan of yours. I've seen you do a talk on, COVID, the Black male perspective on COVID-19, and everything you said here today really resonated, I think, with all of us.
Thank you.
And me as a first gen. And one of the quotes that popped up in my mind when you're speaking is what, MLK said,
right,
that the most inhumane treatment is injustices in healthcare. And so as someone who's an aspiring, physician and a Black female, how do I, in the spaces that I'm in, I guess, being, having physician activism, right? Like not only advocating for my Black patients, but, dropping that knowledge on my non-Black physician colleagues and, the people who are teaching me and training me in med school.
Right. So there's a couple ways. If you are actively in medical school or actively in training, meaning like you are a student somewhere, there's a couple ways you can do it. You can always come. So we respect evidence. Medicine is built around evidence. And there's tons of evidence around some of the things that you're mentioning. Come with the article. Be proactive. Come with the article and say, hey, I just wanted to show you guys this article about maternal mortality. Know that it is 4 times greater than that of whites. It has very little to do with actual medical issues. It has 100% to do with implicit bias. And this is why we need to talk about it, because we can make those same mistakes as clinicians. Hopefully this will make us better. Thanks, guys. That's my TED Talk. You should literally just do that, like come with evidence, because that's the currency in medicine. So I think that that's one way you can do that. The other way is continue to ask smart questions, right? Like ask the social question that no one wants to ask. Ask the equity question that nobody wants to ask. Like, hey, so we're learning a lot about this. What's the hospital policy on, reporting racism? What's the policy? Is there one? Can you point me to it? Is it on a website? You can ask those questions and not be threatening. It's just you saying like, this needs to be on your radar. It needs to be on everybody's radar. And if I am a part of this as a stakeholder, meaning someone who you're getting money off of because I'm seeing patients, or somebody who you're getting some type of government funding from because you are educating me, then I need this to happen. And I need this to be a topic of interest. You feel me?
Definitely. Thank you so much.
Cool. Who else got questions? What's up?
Hi, Dr. Brown. Yes, there's
Karina.
some in the there's some questions in the chat box that came in.
Sure.
Someone is asking, what can white med students, physicians do to support and uplift med students, physicians of color? Has a white colleague or mentor of yours ever done anything that was particularly helpful for you?
So I would start off by answering the last question, then the first question. Yes, many white colleagues have done things for me that I thought was helpful. The heart of it is that white colleague had to have a basically atonement moment with themselves and realize that their privilege gives them the ability to do things like champion others. So if that's not recognized, and you're going to have a very tough time finding an ally, like someone who truly is not performative in their allyship, but demonstrative, right? So I think that you need to do a good job of filtering, like see who understands this and who's ready for this conversation. Introduce these ideas and try to vet people who are like interested in being allies. This is a realistic thing, right? So I've had several colleagues do that. The one that I would think most importantly that I could share about during residency, I had a friend who I wasn't thinking about going for chief resident, and we were having a casual conversation. He and I used to like link up. I'd make a bunch of cocktails at the house. This is all pre-COVID, so it was like safe. And I make cocktails and try new recipes, and he'd come over, and we were one time trying this tequila from like this Oaxacan region, and I was making a drink for him, and he was like, Italo, listen, he said, multiple people in the program have asked me to recommend who I think would be the best for this position. And I'm outwardly saying like, I think you need to do this. I think you should run because of X, Y, and Z. And then he went ahead and just like sent an email. He was like, look, y'all, we don't have this. Italo's doing this. We probably need to look at this. And it was unnecessary, but it was his way of saying like, I'm going to try to advance somebody with the capital that I've built because of X, Y, Z, right? But it doesn't have to be someone just championing you. It can be certain things such as call out the problem when you see it. Basic upstander training. If you're in a space and if you're a white colleague that's on this thread right now, say you are in the same room with somebody and they keep getting passed over for answering a question, and you say, hey, why do you keep missing Italo? He had his hand up. Upstander training. If you're in the same room as a consultant and the consultant consistently is talking to you, even though the patient is his or hers, saying, hey, listen, I know what you're trying to do is get this information across, but you have to give the appropriate respect to the person who has the patient, and that is Dr. Brown, okay? Say it firm, get that point across. And I would say lastly, there is something to be said about celebrating people of color because we are under-celebrated. We're under-celebrated. So when we do something that's fantastic, be vocal about it. Tweet it out. Make sure that you blast it out. Make sure that the program sends it out in the newsletter. And they're like, hey, yo, Italo just did this, man. This is phenomenal. Write some literature about it, send it to somebody, send an email. So those are simple things that you can do that I think help to create an idea of allyship and uplift med students and physicians of color.
Hi, Dr. Brown. My name is Danae.
Hey, Danae. There you go.
So a lot of us on the call are future doctors or pre-meds or somewhere in the between. I, for one, I have a degree in Africana studies, so I know a little bit about the history of health disparities in America and globally.
So I know John was hitting on some special pressure points with you then.
Yes. Yeah. So my question is, like, we know our history, we know history repeats ourselves. What do we do now, especially as pre-meds and especially as people who may not have the agency to make like systematic change? What can we do at our level to kind of combat the things that have been going on historically?
I'm going to say something that, so I have a circle of friend tours, as I like to call them. They are like mentors that are my friends or near peer mentors. And one of my buddies, his name is Jared Lodeholt. And he said something to me. Jared, he's this guy that's like a law student. I mean, he's a lawyer, but a legal mind, political mind, strategist. And he said something that I'll never forget. He said, if you're willing to do the work for free, someone will always take you under their wing. And I was joking about it. I mean, he said it jokingly, but he was like, that's how he got involved in a lot of the social movements that he was a part of, is because he was willing to do that work for free. He was willing to do it because he was so passionate about that. And so I tell you that if you truly are passionate about advancing this cause, there are tons of organizations that need people to do the work, because a lot of your scholars are being split in 5 or 6 different ways. A lot of the people are being like asked to do heavy lifting and just don't have enough hands. And so if you are in the part where you have time and you have the ability and you have the lexicon to have these conversations, do some of the work, do some of the basic work. Make a presentation deck about implicit bias. Make a 3-minute video about microaggressions. Be able to lead a conversation with your peers about allyship and how to actually demonstrate it. These things, although they don't seem like they are like, this, Tesla level world changing idea, it is the small rocks and pieces that you're putting in place to create the brick and mortar to have these larger conversations and larger movements. So be able to do those elements of the work that are not sexy, that are not romantic, that look literally like just drone material, and create that and use it as a repository. It benefits you because you're being satisfied in terms of your desire to have a presence in social justice issues, but it also gives you a body of work. So people, when they look at you 5 years, 6 years down the line, you're this doctor who's running the certain union, or you're on this political campaign and you're their advisor for this, or when you yourself have become a physician that is creating curriculum around social justice and equity issues, you've been doing it. It's not brand new. You didn't turn over. This ain't, something where you just became passionate about it. You have a body of work that speaks to it. Does that help?
It does. Thank you.
Sure, no problem.
All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Carmen, and I am an ambassador for the Northern California region for Mi Mentor. And today I have the pleasure of introducing our next speaker, Dr. Ruth Arumala. Dr. Ruth Arumala is an obstetrician gynecologist with a practice in Mansfield, Texas, and is on the executive board of Texas Health Mansfield. She also serves as an assistant professor in OB-GYN at TCU UNTHSC Medical School in Fort Worth. Dr. Arumala is then extremely passionate about all things women and hosts the Pretty Plus Pink podcast, where she interviews inspirational female expert guests who explore a broad range of topics that affect women. Dr. Arumala will be leading our 3rd workshop called Black plus Female, the Double Minority in Medicine. And I will now turn it over to Dr. Arumala.
Hi, everybody. I caught a little bit of Dr. Brown workshop, and it was excellent, and I was inspired. I hope you were too. But I'm going to take a different turn in this journey, and I want you guys to take a second and just close your eyes and imagine what I'm talking talking to you about. So wherever you are in your journey, a doctor, perhaps you're a pre-med student, a medical student, resident, fellow, attending, there's a lot of work to get to where you are, and a lot of work ahead of you, even if you are an attending. And you set on this journey and you start this journey. You keep going on this path, and you get to a point where you are in residency and you meet the love of your life, and you get married, the dream. You have a life partner, you have a passion that you are excelling in, and you're at this point, and you decide you're going to do an extra year because you want to be a chief resident. And so as you go through that journey, you get pregnant. And so everything is just marching on as it should be, and you're reaching all of life's goals, and you're growing your family. And then in your pregnancy, you happen to start having problems. Your face is swelling, your hands are swelling. You go to your OBGYN appointment, and you find out that you have blood pressure issues, and your blood pressure keeps going up and up and up. And so you go in for early delivery because you have been diagnosed with preeclampsia. It doesn't really go that way. A lot of other things happen, but humor me. And then all of a sudden, you are the headline. You're all over social media because you're no longer with us. You've passed away. So that's the experience of Shanice Wallace, a pediatric resident in Illinois who died this year from complications of preeclampsia. She had a ruptured capsule called Glibson's capsule outside of your liver, and that was one of the complications of preeclampsia. And we are now kind of aware that the newest data says that Black women are 5 times more likely to die in pregnancy than a white woman. And when you control for your socioeconomic level, when you control for your education, it actually is very perplexing, because the opposite is actually rings true in this case, where your socioeconomic status and your education level actually makes you more susceptible to dying during pregnancy. And so that kind of bothers me as a future mom. I wonder what it is to be Black and female in America today, and in medicine as it is today. Give you another example. Just think about the fact that you have gone through the experience of medical school, residency, fellowship, and you just got your dream job. You get signed to a contract at Harvard Medical School, and your parents have been living for this. And then COVID happens, and you call your parents and you tell your parents, you're older, I need you to stay at home, stop going out. Like all of us have been, now our parents are our kids. And you realize that your parents have been trying, but they have to get food. They have to go to the grocery store, right? So they go to the grocery store, they get what they need. And somehow in this, they contract COVID. Well, they end up going to, your dad ends up going to the hospital. And at the hospital, you FaceTime him all the time. You want to know everything about each nurse, each shift. You are doing the best that you can because you cannot be with this person, right? You can't be with your father. You cannot be there because of COVID. And so, Your dad goes to use the bathroom. He wants to use the bathroom. He actually wants to do a number two. And so he keeps calling and ringing and calling and ringing, and no nurse comes. And he's a man with some dignity. So he gets up off the bed, he takes off his oxygen mask, he goes to the toilet, sitting on the commode, he becomes unresponsive, and his life fades away. You think to yourself, man, I'm a physician, I couldn't help my dad. And then, of course, your dad was around your mom, and COVID is widely contagious. And so you end up having a situation where your mom is also COVID positive with underlying health issues. And 2 weeks later, she dies. That's the story of one of my closest friends from medical school who lost both her father and her mother during COVID. That's what it means to be Black and a woman in America today and in medicine. So I want to take you all the way back, probably to where you are now. You're pre-med, and you sit yourself in front of a pre-med advisor. I know many of you, and add it in the chat if you have had a similar experience. You're sitting across from somebody who's reviewing your academic performance, your CV, and they're reviewing all of this. And they start to peer over their glasses at you. And they say to you, it's okay, it's average. I don't really think that you should be a doctor. I don't really think that what I see here, you're gonna get in. So I'm gonna tell you to consider maybe being a physician assistant, nothing wrong with that, or try something else. Something else might work for you. And you look and you say, wait, what? I have 160 credits. I have a 3.7 GPA. I don't know what MCATs are now, but I have a 33 MCAT when it is double digits. Do you want my left kidney? Is that what you'd like? That's what it means to be Black and a woman in America in medicine. Or you're in medical school and you sit around with everybody else right across from you, and they say to you, dang, it sure must be great to be a Black person in America. It must be great. Look, you're here. Affirmative action, right? And you look at them and you think to yourself, I can guarantee you that my MCAT scores are higher than yours. I can guarantee you that I deserve to be in this seat just as much as you deserve to be in that seat. But that person looks at you as inferior because that's what it means to be Black and a woman in America in medicine today. Or you're in residency and you're trying really, really hard. You're really, really trying hard. And somebody happens not to like you for whatever reason. So you say to yourself, you know what? She treats everybody else well. I'm not going to play the Black card. I'm not going to play the Black card. It is not because of the way I look. It is not because my melanin glistens when the sun kisses it. It's none of that. It's because our personalities just don't get along. And then you realize that this person sits at home and reads the notes that you write to ensure that you wrote the right notes when you're not even on her service. Where she comes to your face and she sits across from you, she says to you, don't address me unless you call me ma'am. Ma'am. That is somebody who was probably my age or a year older than me, who sits across from me and thinks that she can take me back to when I could not, I would have been docile and been attributed the infantile characteristics and be called girl. And I have to respond to her with respect as ma'am. Or when a patient would not see you because you're just a resident. So I'm like, okay, I guess I'm just a resident. I mean, they just want to see the attending. Find out that the reason why she sees all the other residents. She sees all the other residents, but she won't see because you're 2 out of 40 Black residents. She won't see you. Here she gets cared of. She just won't see you. Or if you're an attending, I made it through. I've made it through undergrad. I have made it through master's programs. I have made it through medical school. I have made it through fellowship. I am an attending. Life must be better on this side. That's what they told me. Those are the dreams that they sold me. And you have a patient who comes to see you. You have what you think is a pleasant experience with this patient. At least you forced it. You forced it to be a pleasant experience. And then the patient leaves your office. And this is an obstetric patient, so she should be seeing me in the first and second trimester every 4 weeks. 5 weeks comes, she hasn't seen you. Your office calls, she sends your office to voicemail. 5.5 weeks, same thing. 6 weeks, same thing. 6.5 weeks, because now you're worried, you're concerned. This is a patient that you have the responsibility of bringing to a successful delivery. And one day your MA calls, and then she comes into your office and she closes the door and she said to me, she's not coming back. And you're like, oh, did she find another provider? No, when I picked up, she snapped and she said, ain't no Black girl gonna be taking care of me. I live in Texas. That's what it means to be Black and female in medicine today. Or you might have heard or read my CV, and you find out that you're serving in a position where your counterparts, mind you, you're the only head of department that looks like me or has breasts. And you're sitting at tables. You always bring up the issues that are not being addressed. Dr. Brown talked about, do we have a policy for reporting racism? Do we have a policy that will ensure that everybody, regardless of their skin tone, is treated equally? You bring up the questions that pertain to your population consistently in every meeting, every time. And then off the cuff, you hear from one of the VPs that another head of department is getting paid $80,000 more than you for that position of being head of department. 80,000.00 more than you. And you approach management in a collegial, professional way and say, what is the compensation for head of department supposed to be? And they say to you that there's no compensation, but because you are actually starting up the program, they happen to give you a little change because you're taking so much of your personal time. You could be dedicated to taking care of patients, doing surgery, delivering babies, sleeping. sleep is really good. And they say to you, we'll investigate it, we'll look into it when you lay your case out. And they send you, the CEO calls you actually and says, we don't have money. We don't have it in the budget. So we can always ask your colleague to be head of the department, because my colleague is 30 something years older than me, and she's used to working for free. And that's what it means to be really, really, if you get down to the nitty gritty, I'm not quite sure which one of the minorities is in play. I don't know if it's because I'm Black. I don't know if it's because I'm a woman. I don't know if it's because I have a foreign last name. I don't know if it's because I go into my African Tourette sometimes when I'm talking fast and I don't know what's I don't know. I don't know what it is. But I want to give you hope, because in every single one of those steps, there is a way that you win regardless. Let's go all the way back to where most of you are, pre-med. You may not have some privileges that other people have. You may not have seen your parent pick up a white coat, wear a stethoscope, live in the nicest neighborhood, and drive popping cars. So you may not know what it takes to become a physician. Do you need to take the MCAT? Do you not need to take the MCAT? Do you need to perform and get these grades to take those classes or do this major? You might not know that. You may have to sit across from an advisor that will help you and advise you about the list of to-dos that you need to do. But that does not mean that you have to imbibe the projection of how they see you or how they see themselves. Their biases don't have to affect your dream. Because your dream, you're worth your dream. No one is more worth your dream than you are. Or you're in medical school and you hear the chatter, and that motivates you to work even harder, so that when you progress, you know that through adversity, you came out. Through the fire, you came out shining so bright, brighter than any diamond, because that's what it takes. Pressure. That's what makes diamonds. Or you're a resident who decides that, you know what, you underestimate me, watch me. And you decide that you're going to wake up earlier, and you're going to fight harder, and you're going to become the best freaking physician that you possibly can be. You're going to know more. You're going to tie your knots down better, and you're going to take every criticism and take away the negativity, and you're going to use it to make you better, because you know what? No one can take that away from you. And then you decide that you're going to market with your face, so that everybody that comes into your office knows that you're a Black woman, and that's who they're coming to see. You're not the front desk. Nothing wrong with you, but you are the physician. And then you decide that you're going to take that professional slap in the face, which was really personal, but they like to veil it as if it was professional, and you decide you're going to be the best in your area, because they can't take that away from you. No one can take that away from you. And you decide that you're going to fight to make sure that the compensation for the next woman, the next Black woman, the next foreign Black woman, the next Black woman who, when she starts to talk fast, her accent gives her a little Tourette's, and you do that because you know that you're fighting for a greater purpose. You're working towards a greater purpose, not just accepting every little insult, taking it personally, going and sulking, that does nobody any good. So my message to you is, I hope that you don't go through the same experiences that I went through. My mother's a geriatrician. I pray to God that you do not see a tenth of the insults and the trials that she has gone through. Because I hope that we have gone through that so that we can lay down and that you can stand on our shoulders and that you can be the change that makes the next generation not have to go through that. My name is Dr. Ruth Arumala, and that was my experience as being a Black woman in medicine today. Any questions?
Hi, Dr. Arumala. So someone did on the chat box ask, women have been fighting for equal pay such a long time, but how do we demand that we are paid equally?
So I think that demand is a strong word from a woman. We all know what happened with, if you are into politics at all, you know what happened with Hillary Clinton and how some of the things that she did were looked at in a different lens because she was a woman. So I think that what happens is that there either has to be sweeping change where, like what just happened, we have a Black woman as a vice president. There has to be some kind of overhaul where someone decides that, you know, they're going to actually treat you like you should be treated. And then that allows for the next person to demand the same type of pay, and it keeps snowballing forward. But the other type of change is incremental, where we keep inching closer, we get 52% of pay. I mean, you have to remember that there are times, I mean, in the 1920s where women could not buy land in their name. They had to have a husband to buy land. I am not married, so I clearly could not own land at that point. So I think it's very interesting. And I think one of the things that's going to make it better is when physicians start discussing their pay with each other and not agreeing to sign contracts that don't allow people to know what your pay is. Because it was just a blabbermouth that made me know that I was getting paid. I didn't even know this was a thing. And when I talked to my lawyer said, how did you sign an addendum to your contract without speaking to me? Because I would have told you that they're not lowballing you, they are spitting on you. I hope that kind of answers the question.
Thank you. We have another question in the chat. Can licensure at the state level be associated with policies around equity and anti-racist, anti-bias, continuing medical education, or something where the ability to practice is tied to these skills?
That's really a really good question. So from what I understand is, can legislature or policy change that? It's a free market at the end of the day because physicians don't have to be employed. I'm in a really interesting combination of being self-employed and partially employed, hospital-based employed, private practice. It kind of helps in a bit because I would have gone under with COVID, right? So I had that stability, but at the same time, there is a time where I have no affiliation with a hospital and it's a free market. So it's hard to legislate a free market in that sense, but I'm not a lawyer by any means. And I think that's a good thought and something that we as physicians need to learn how to advocate for ourselves. I think we're starting to find out because of COVID. You know, I have a lot of friends who went down to 10% of their pay, 10% of their pay. So imagine making, let's say 400,000 because she was a dermatologist, and going down to making 40,000. That is less than what you make in residency. So I think that it is, and that's really interesting, you know. So I think we have to learn how to advocate for ourselves, because if we advocated for ourselves half as much as nurses advocate for themselves, we wouldn't be in this situation.
Thank you so much for sharing. There's another question. It says, thank you so much for sharing your story. Can you tell us what your weekly schedule looks like? What are your different roles?
Oh my gosh, my roles are so many. My weekly schedule is trash, absolute trash. I am on call every single day for all my patients, which makes me limit how many obstetric patients I also do about 80 to 90 GYN. I operate a lot. So Monday, Wednesday, Friday in clinic. Tuesdays and Thursdays I operate, and I do procedures in my office. That's all I do. And early because I'm very spiritual, so I pray and I work out and I study a lot because I'm taking my boards, second phase part 2 of my boards, which is supposed to be oral, but it's now written because of COVID. And in the evenings, I tend to do my podcast. I teach med school. I'm on the, trying to get off of being on the medical executive board. I interact with the nurses a lot because it's a brand new hospital. So we are still planning a lot of policies and doing a lot of things that are necessary to get a new hospital up and running to a point where it is self-sustainable. And then I'm a writer in a sense. I like to tell stories, as you have probably gathered. And so I write a lot for a lot of magazines and things like that. And they're never peer to peer. I think Dr. Brown talked a little bit about gathering your work. My mission has always been health literacy. I'm very passionate about patients being able to understand more about their bodies. My favorite statement, which I need to trademark, is that you are the CEO of your body. And so I work for you. You just tell me, I'm gonna tell you I'm gonna give you my expert opinion, but you're still the CEO of your body. And so I want women to know more about their bodies. So I write for like Glamour magazine and different like news outlets. That's kind of what I do. So that's kind of like the nutshell. I take care of my plants. I'm a nerd.
Thank you so much. Another question is, out of curiosity, what are some of your favorite books?
Oh, very nice question. So the Bible, because I read it every day, all day. I have read, there's a book right here. I'm going to pull out some of my favorite books because they're right here in case anybody wants to see them. My 4 favorite books outside of the Bible are The Audacity of Hope, because, 44 is my president. And then Ego is the Enemy. This is by Ryan Holiday. And of course, if we're here talking medical apartheid, I actually at one point was writing a book about how social media has really changed the game for Black people in general. And the Vagina Bible. So those are my top 4, and actually in the top shelf here. So those are my top 5 books.
And then another question is asking, do you mentor?
I do mentor. I am at the absolute capacity with 43 people. And I was not supposed to go over 40 because my assistant now deals with all my emails because she doesn't want me to keep saying yes. So I do mentor, but I don't have any more. I'm stretched so thin.
And then I guess this was for the other Dr. Patton and Dr. Brown. If I guess someone's asking if they mentor as well. And then another question is, what are some ways non-Black women can be allies for Black women?
So I think that first you have to decide if you are an ally or if you just want to deal with current events. Let me give you an example. I really care about the climate, but I rarely recycle. And I have really told myself that's one of the things I need to work on. Because although I think it's a hot topic, I think it is so interesting that we work on that, I don't actually do it, right? So you have to first really be real with yourself. Do you want to help? And if you do, let's say you really do, then at that point you have to make yourself the best position, because inevitably you're going to treat Black women. And so you need to have the skills to be able to like be a good physician, be a great physician, be an exceptional physician. And then with that, in every step as you go along, point out inequalities in a way that is palatable to the, and I think this is debatable. This is my personal opinion. To point out inequities in a way that is palatable to the person that you're talking to, because I ascribe to the, you win a lot of bees with honey. That's just how I'm built. I'm not super aggressive, and if I'm super aggressive, that means I'm frustrated. And so I think that articulating your points in a way that doesn't show your frustration, but is strong and is firm and is resilient and is persevering, I think that's the way to do it. But that's my opinion. Dr. Brown might think something else.
And another question is, social media has helped highlight the mistreatment of Black women within healthcare. What can we do as future doctors to make changes in this area?
Well, that's a very good, really, really astute question. However, it's a very difficult thing to address. And I'm going to kind of answer the question in a different way. The question that's usually asked from a broader perspective is, how can we address health disparities when it comes to Black women versus women of other races? And so that poses the question that you're asking. And that is a very tough thing, because medicine was not built for Black people. It's just the truth. Many institutions were built when slavery was a thing and was the thing that almost rocked and destroyed the democracy and a republic. So if it was not made for this particular group of people, then how can we change and pull apart a system and bend it to mold it into taking care of Black women? Now, I'll give you an example. In my medical textbooks, in any medical textbooks, you see that, and any medical literature in general, you see that Black women almost are always are a risk factor for everything. A risk factor for everything, except smoking, on being underweight, cystic fibrosis, and a few other choice diseases that I remember well, because that's the way to remember it. Everything else is your Black woman is a risk factor for. And so when I learned this, I learned it as that is just what it is. It might be because they don't take care of themselves. It might be because we are poor. It might be because our melanin is the reason why we have these differences, like actually, and that's how it was taught, and that's how I imbibed it, until one day I said, this cannot be, this is not it. This is not it. Because racism, lack of understanding and having cultural competency is a risk factor. I'll give you kind of a weird description. When I was in residency, one of my co-residents, who's a senior resident to me, came to me and she was like, Ruth, tell me, what is Black mouse? I need to know what Black mouse is. How do people smoke mouses and mice? I don't understand. And I told her, girl, there's a whole thing called Black and Miles. That's what you're talking about. So that's the thing, is that there are some words, some things that we say that just don't translate to a population that doesn't understand, care to understand, or really care.
Thank you so much. Another question is, how stats often separate Blacks and Latinos into different groups. How can medicine address Afro-Latinas and their experience in medicine and receiving healthcare services?
So this is a thing. This is a really good question, because a lot of the times when someone sees you, they assume that you're Black, and your skin tone denotes that you're Black. But there is a subcategory of Black Caribbeans, Black Native Americans, which I don't really know how to explain that, African Blacks, Afro-Latinas. And so it is difficult to sort of tease that out. I think Afro-Latinas as a group also need to advocate for themselves and this discussion has to be brought to light, not in a way that is trying to serve competing roles. I think every person needs to be treated equally. And maybe that's the way to do it. I'm not one of those people that will ever say that color doesn't matter and I don't see color. I see it loud and clear. I wake up in the morning and I know that this right here, this is Black. Like, it's blackity black, black with a side of Black. In my purse, there's a sprinkle of Black ready to go on my Black skin. So, you know, I feel like it actually negates people. And if I was an Afro-Latina, I would feel the same way. I am an Afro-Latina and I need to be treated as such. So I don't really know the answer. I talked a lot with no answer. I don't really know the answer. I would love to hear if somebody else knows the answer because I don't know.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Okay, so we're gonna go ahead and transition to our fourth speaker, our last speaker, and that's Dr. Efrain Talamantes. Dr. Talamantes earned his medical degree from David Geffen School of Medicine at the University of California, Los Angeles, and his MBA at Emory University and Master's in Science and Health Policy and Management at the UCLA Fielding School of Public Health. Dr. Talamantes joined AltaMed in 2018 and was recently appointed Chief Operating Officer of AltaMed Health Services. He is also the co-founder of MeMentor.org. I'm sure many of us know him today. And he also leads initiatives throughout the country to enhance leadership and diversity in the healthcare workforce. He'll be presenting our final workshop called Anti-Racism in Health and Healthcare. So the floor is yours, Dr. T.
All right, well, good afternoon or evening, depending on what time zone you're in. And let me go ahead and share my slides here. All right, excellent. Well, first of all, as one of the co-founders of MeMentor, you know, about, this was maybe 2012, when we came up with this concept of having an online community, and to see it flourish in 2020 like it has in the midst of one of the most, I would say for us, all of us here, generational crises has been a real blessing in disguise. And I'm just really fortunate to be among so many powerful speakers, Dr. Patton, Dr. Brown, Dr. Arumala. What a privilege to be amongst you, and really thank you. I think that as I've gone through my career as an internal medicine physician, these issues have not only been a real passion of mine, but it's been a real journey to see them from so many different facets, both as a person of color growing up in an underserved community with many other people of color, as someone who went on to get an education, as someone who is now a health professional and continues to struggle in a world where our system in healthcare is racist. And so today I'm here to talk to you a little bit about an anti-racist healthcare system to advance health equity. Health equity to me has been a life pursuit. I used to tell my mentors that I wanted to have a career in health equity. Many shared that it was a leap of faith, that there wasn't a career in health equity. But just to show you that those leaps of faith are worth every single step. And I could share with you that in my role as Chief Operating Officer here at UltiMed, we're the nation's largest fairly qualified healthcare system in Southern California, serving about 300,000 patients, both here in LA and Orange County. And I get to oversee not only our patient care, but about 3,000 individuals who are in our healthcare system. And that includes our providers, not just physicians, but also our nurses and administrators. So I'm gonna go ahead and go to the next slide. Let me see if I can figure this out. So I just wanna share with you that I am part of the California Medical Association Wellness University faculty. I do get paid to talk about wellness. And my actual role within that faculty is actually to talk about health equity and really cover some of these issues around racism or really anti-racism as we now understand it. So really a true privilege to be able to do this work. I want to share with you one of our paintings at UltiMed. We're known for having one of the largest Chicano Latino art collection in the world. And our founder and CEO, Cástulo de la Rocha, really made it a point early in when he joined UltiMed. It was a free clinic then, but then it became UltiMed under his leadership to collect art from local artists. And this is one of our local artists who put together this beautiful painting that really resembles not only our mission of eliminating health disparities, but really our commitment to both people of color in leadership, and why I'm actually here today as a physician practicing in this health system. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about, and I was really glad to see a lot of the work that both Dr. Patton, Dr. Brown, and Dr. Arumala shared today, really powerful experiences. And I'll tell you that when Vanessa Rangel, who is now a medical student at UCLA, shared with me her vision of having a Together We Lead through Mi Mentor and having a virtual or in-person space, I wasn't sure what it meant. But what she asked was, she said, you know, as a pre-health student, we don't get a lot of time to really learn and understand these issues that you and many other mentors know so well. So can we have a space where we actually learn how to lead? And today, really, it's about leadership. Black Lives Matter is about leadership, the power of Black Lives Matter and its movement, and it really sparking not only the interest of people of color, but the young people who came out during this election to vote. And the statement they made is incredibly powerful. And we have a lot of work to do. It doesn't stop there. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about a historical perspective, both of disparities in health and healthcare. Why in healthcare in the US we're in this actual state, and what do we need to do to move to a future state that is actually anti-racist? I'm going to share with you an adapted version of time-effective strategies for teaching to really not only prevent but address racism in healthcare, and really outline a health equity approach, and really ultimately continue to promote the partnerships that Mi Mentor continues today. As one of the founders, it's really honorable for me to see the work that you're leading. And I know I want to thank those of you behind the scenes that made this possible and put this amazing panel together for everybody to enjoy. So what is anti-racism? When we think about the work in the field, it's actually an evolution. I think that many times we think that, especially as scholars, many of you are scholars if you're pursuing education, is that we know enough. Well, in actuality, I would say that the field of anti-racism, while it has existed for many years, has not really come to life in the ways it has until this pandemic. And, you know, there are many scholars out there, and this is one of many scholars or a group of scholars that put this together, really to look at where in the continuum you are. When you think about any organization, I mean, pick Mi Mentor, for example, where are we? Are we exclusive? Are we passive? Are we of symbolic change? Are we an identity, really affirming institution that brings people in and really supports them? Do we have the structures in place? Are we fully inclusive and anti-racist? Is that something part of our vision, mission, values? Is that something we talk about all the time? And I could ask myself the same about Ultimed and the work we do here. And really, I would say that most of us are in a journey. I could say that many of our experiences growing up, we've been in the far left, left of the screen here, where everything was exclusive, right? I mean, from the beginning of us joining any kind of club, school, whatever you want to call it. We even had sometimes within our own clubs. I joined the Black Pre-Health Club at UCLA as an undergrad. And the questions is, why are you here, right? And part of it, and even within the Chicano Latino Club, when we had other students join us, why are you here? And we've moved a long way. I think many of you who are now in undergrad in clubs, you are the you symbolize moving to really an anti-racist organizational culture. And I would say that many of the organizations that you will go into, clinics or healthcare spaces, are still in need of your support and ideas. I know Dr. Patton did share this painting with all of you, illustration by Dr. J. Marion Sims, and really, illustrated some of our history in healthcare. And I just want to focus in a little bit on that. And I just want you to take the time to also appreciate that the way this was painted, the stance of, in this case, the subject, the Black woman, and the physicians around her, and the stance that they take. There's also some folks peeking through in the back there, quote unquote, maybe slaves in this era, but Black slaves, more importantly, and how women who were Black, I mean, there's so many layers. It's not just racism, but it's also what is power, right? And what does this look like today? That's really the real question for us as you go into your clinic settings or healthcare settings or health settings. What does this look like today? It may not look as brutal as putting a Black woman through unnecessary experimenting surgical techniques, but there is still a lot of injustice that we see today. And I would just have you appreciate, yes, that we have come a long way. Again, Dr. Patton showed that the father of OB-GYN, the father of healthcare in women's health, and the fact that he was experimenting on Black women, in this case slaves, is no longer an icon, although our history is still there. And so there's a lot of work we have to do, given that we've come from a very tumultuous history that is racist, that is clear. And early in my work, this is actually some slides from when I was in medical school. I read the Flexner Report. And around the turn of the century, actually, this is when medicine got good. Earlier in the 18th century, you actually went to a doctor to die. I mean, there was really not much that they could do for you besides potentially do treatments that would actually shorten your life, not expand it. And around the turn of the century, 19th to 20th century, we started to really propel medicine in this country to advance. And obviously, again, there's a history there. Physicians were known as people of magic. We used to leech people for a pneumonia. We didn't have antibiotics then. And even then, as we started to progress, there was already a disparity in life expectancy. And that's for a variety of reasons. Today, we call it social determinants of health, social needs. So as we went through our history, I would say the first and foremost, one of the scholars I would call the father of anti-racism is really W.E.B. Du Bois, who really was describing the problem of the 20th century as a problem of the color line. And, you know, his first studies, I got to spend some time doing health services research and really looking at data, really described the mortality among, in this case, Negroes in the cities, you know, and this is out of Atlanta University. And he was able to publish really the discrepancy or disparity today of white and colored. And we know that obviously people of color have always taken on high risk, high exposure jobs where they actually have a known limited life expectancy. And so, you know, as he published, he was able to show that the life expectancy, obviously, or in this case, the mortality of people of color was already 2 times. And this is early on in 1896. I mean, think about how much time has progressed and whether how much progress or not enough progress we've made. So why do I talk about Flexner? Flexner is known as our father of medical education. And he actually has a pretty interesting history of discrimination himself and where his family came from. But he came to the United States and he was actually asked as a consultant to look at all the medical schools, both in the US and Canada, and really create standards, right? And it was really a model of reform. And if you can, you know, get your hands, you can Google Flexner Report 1910 and be able to read it. But when I read this as a medical student, it really sort of implanted the fact that our institutions are not only racist, but the birth of racism is historical and it's entrenched. And oftentimes we actually, when we go through our journeys through education, medical school, or even training, or even practice, we're not able to see the racism anymore because we learn how to ignore it. So really creating a separate but unequal medical education system. There was at the time African American medical schools for people of color. They were given a different mission. They were told, the African American physicians at the time, they were told that their job was to do public health, not necessarily medical care, because that's what the needs of the Negro were at the time, right? So really this report was taken up by the Association of American Medical Colleges, the Association of American Medical Colleges as well, medical education, medical schools, and really provided the blueprints for what we have today. And so if you feel like medical school is beyond reach, it starts with 1910 Flexner. It really articulated a limited vision for the role of Black physicians in America. It really excluded them, and it was very intentional what they put in these reports. Just to give you a sense, the Negro must be educated not only for his sake, but for ours. He is, as far as human eye can see, a permanent factor in the nation. He has a right. He has rights and due and value as an individual, but he has, besides, a tremendous importance that belongs to a potential source of infection and contagion. So really, Black physicians should be sanitarians and hygienists. And that was very clear in the reporting of Flexner and taken up by all the medical schools and really detrimental. So really, while the purpose of Flexner was to normalize medical education, create standards, you can thank Flexner for the MCAT, the Medical College Admissions Test, for all the different tests, the boards that we have today and all this. It was really meant to strengthen the health of Americans. And we could say that, you know, those standards by many measures may have proved fruitful. However, the consequences were structural racism within academic medicine. It really restricted the production of physicians capable of addressing. It was so limited, the view of Black physicians in this country, that it really set them on a different path. And at the time, we know there was medical schools that were specific for African-American or Black individuals. We know them now as historically Black medical schools. And so you could see at the time that, you know, Howard and Meharry were producing 3/4 of Black physicians between 1910 and 1960. And today continue to be the leading institutions of producing Black physicians with very little or no support from others. Now, there's been some movement and progress in both the federal government and institutions recognizing the contributions and the need for support and to continue to increase the work that Howard and Meharry do. and others, right? So, Charles Ardrey University comes in later, so on and so forth. But you could see there was a lot of other medical schools that didn't make it, right? Because many actually were forced to shut down because of the Flexner report, because they were not meeting standards. The medical associations, where did they stand? When we think about one of our greatest organizations in this country, the National Medical Association, it was actually formed because Black physicians and or other people of color were not allowed in the Association of American Medical Colleges. The Associated Medical Association, the AMA as known today, or even the Association of American Medical Colleges. And it was clear that the leadership, right? And we talked a little bit about the need for leadership and where you stand and where you will be. Well, they took a stance, and they took a stance that they were not going to interfere with the standards at the time. They were not going to mess with the admissions policies of the non-Black medical schools. They were going to say, you do it however you think is best, and we're not interfering. Well, that created a whole entire, again, separate but equal system in terms of medical education, where the white students, or those quote unquote that were white or identified as white, and those of people of color. And so again, a separate but equal medical education system. And so Dr. Cameron Jones, again, someone I read a lot about in my early training, really is that there is the initial historical insult. It's a traumatic insult of separating two seeds and putting them in two different types of soil with the necessary money, right? The Flexner report dictated where money went, right? It didn't go to Black medical schools, obviously, because most of them shut down. It didn't go into communities of color, although we all pay taxes and have, again, tremendous responsibility for an infrastructure for the whole country. It was very clear and evident where the resources went. And so you can imagine the seeds and the growth and who's going to actually be the quote unquote stronger flower or more blossoming flower. And as you heard today, many of us actually come from communities where most of us, people like us, ended up in jail, dead, or are still in the community and poor because there was a real institutional effort to keep us from having the investments that we need to be successful. And the few of us that make it, we actually carry a lot of responsibility on our shoulders to inspire you and to support you and to ask you to join us, because we need you and we need you to power through, and we need you to involve yourself in becoming leaders so that we can lead together, right? And that's the concept of Together We Lead. And so in 1968, think about the time span, the WMC and AMA actually endorsed the expansion of really collective enrollment, that now it was time to really allow for all qualified applicants, regardless of background, race, ethnicity, gender, all these things, right? And it transformed medicine. There's a reason why we're here and we can actually talk to you as physicians. But it took a lot of people behind the scenes, right? Many of these great leaders, that many of them put their life on the line or protested or dedicated their entire lives to opening up these doors of opportunities for us. So as I moved through my career, I went to continue as an internal medicine physician. I went to do a fellowship, not in a specialty, but in health services. And I really started to learn about measuring quality. What is quality? How do we measure it in healthcare, even in health? And Donna Bedian, another physician with a really interesting background, who came to the University of Michigan and really started outlining for us in healthcare, what is really quality? What does it look like in terms of structure? You think about the structures. I know many of you grew up like myself, going to community clinics or even the county, and the structures that are in place compared to maybe where you are today, or you've had an opportunity to access care at an academic medical center. And the structures look very different, right? And then even the processes, how we coordinate the patient experience. We talk about a lot about the patient experience, access to the types of tests or even equipment that's in those clinics is very different depending on the community. Well, all this impacts outcomes of care. We know that, and we know it well. access is not only one issue, but the structure and the people, right? So we can talk about both structures, not just patients in this case, but it's also us, right? So when you and your families go access care, do you have access to someone who shares your background, your race, ethnicity? Do you even have the opportunity to have a physician of color to take care of you? I mean, those are the kinds of things that I would say, as I looked at these models, were missing and really contribute to some of the disparities. One of the most impactful reports out of the Institute of Medicine was in 2002. Again, this is my first year of medical school, and I got to go through this and learn about it again through a lot of great mentors who opened up my eyes to really what's happening in healthcare beyond my own community, beyond my own experiences, was this concept of racial and ethnic variation, nice term for racism in healthcare, really about access, patient preference, clinical needs, and looked at appropriateness. And again, this is health services research. So all the folks that put all this data together and came up with these beautiful concepts and graphs are health services research. Just a plug for many of you who may want to become a health services researcher while you practice medicine. And really what we were able to learn was that there are differences. Yes, there are disparities, and then there's discrimination, or in this case, racism, right? And they looked at non-minority and minority populations and the quality of care. And of course, we already knew from the get-go that quality of care is better for non-minorities. But what really accounts for the difference? Some people would say, well, it's clinical appropriateness. It means that, you know, Latinos they're not educated. They don't know what to eat. They don't want to come to the doctor. That's their own preference, right? There's disparities in diabetes and hypertension because they choose not to. Okay, well, let's factor that out. That's because that's part of the difference. The disparity really is our healthcare system, the way it's been designed by the people, right? If you think about who's designed the system, and their biases are flat out racism. And then more importantly, how they put the system together. The laws, I mean, some of you raise policy questions. Great. You got to go to the policy. What is the root of all evil in this case? Well, many times it's outdated policies that have not been updated for years. Covenants, right? We talk a lot about in real estate, the covenants of not allowing certain people of color in certain communities, so on and so forth. Well, we have the same thing in healthcare. We're not immune. Putting on that white coat does not make us immune to any of that. We are also not immune to discriminate, to be racist. I mean, you know, here we call it bias, we call it stereotype, we call it uncertainty. But I'll tell you that it's flat out racism. So we know, again, there's disparities in healthcare structures. I remember I used to get overwhelmed just seeing all the data, overwhelmed by like, man, it's pretty bad. How do we become optimistic about addressing these when it's like every single study just points out to the disparity? And it's not just structures, it's process. I'm not going to go into details here as much as to say that there's outcomes. Well, let's move forward, right? Advancing health equity is really about the way to right wrongs and really shedding truth upon them. And I would say many of you are here today are not only anti-racist, but you're health equity warriors. And you're trying to shine truth and asking really good questions, standing up for what you believe in, relying on mentors too. Say, well, Dr. Talamantes said this. I want to share this with you. Put me on the spot. More than happy to. And I'll have a conversation with whoever I need to. But really relying on us to support you through your journey, because we know it is difficult. This is Ida B. Wells, African-American journalist, who actually was one of the lead activists in an anti-lynching crusade in the US. This is in the 1890s. Someone who's a scholar who says, you know, I'm going to go and become someone who leads anti-lynching. How do we lead anti-law enforcement violence? I mean, that today is a topic of discussion. So I'm just going to share with you a couple of brief approaches, because this happens a lot in medicine, and I'm just adapting what Doctors Glick, this is out of the Journal of General Internal Medicine, what they called diagnosing the learner teaching rapidly, providing feedback, and promoting reflection. I mean, a lot of things that we have to do. Unfortunately, as people of color, as subject matter experts who really know this stuff, oftentimes it falls on us to be the teachers, right? The examples, take the higher road, whatever you want to call it. And it is exhausting, but as we build these communities, I would say that's what's given me a lot of relief, is relying on communities like Mi Mentor to continue to fuel me and to partner with physicians like Dr. Patton, Dr. Brown, Dr. Arumala, really to take on these very ginormous, I would say, again, overwhelming challenges like racism. So here you have a case. Anybody want to read the case just so I can get a little bit of folks going here?
Yeah, I can read it. This is James.
Thank you, James. Good to see you.
Yeah, good to see you too. A resident presents her patient, a 63-year-old African-American man with advanced degenerative joint disease of the knees who has persistent pain despite maximal medical therapy. The resident asks about additional non-surgical options. She states she has discussed knee replacement surgery with the patient and he doesn't want it. You inquire about the patient's concerns, but the resident repeats, he just said he doesn't want it. You probably learn to diagnose her, learning need and find familiar with disparities in joint replacement, a knowledge gap, and does not know how to elicit a patient about surgery, a skill gap. How might you effectively and rapidly teaching to this resident?
Excellent. And I know many of you, thank you, James, are in your journey, and sometimes you're in clinical settings or even non-clinical settings and you hear people. And some of it is, you know, flat out just, you know, that they have a lot to learn. And especially if they come from privilege and think there's nothing wrong with them. And even myself, I think that sometimes, and I really appreciate Dr. Brown's call to action, which is, you know, we're still learning ourselves and I'm still learning. And I have to always remind myself of that. Even though I'm at this level, people could say that I'm done. No, I'm not. I think there's still a lot to be done. So really, when you think about it, many of us will learn differential diagnosis. We become physicians, and this is kind of one of the arts we learn quite well. It's almost like an automatic reflex in how we think. And really that the knowledge gap in this case is really that you have someone who may come from a background that was racist and not know it, or colorblind, even better, right? Colorblind, we hear that all the time. I don't see color. Well, they've never had the opportunity to really understand what anti-racism is, right? We're in that sort of spectrum and journey. And it takes time, patience, right? It's easy to run out of patience, but if you take the scholar approach and teach, right? Then you look at, well, you know, so-and-so, let's say Maria, I'm detecting a knowledge gap. What do you mean, doctor? You know, here we have an African-American man. What do you know about knee osteoarthritis of the knee in African-American men? Well, what are you talking about? Or just African-Americans? What are you talking about? Well, have you read anything? Well, I mean, knee pain's the same, all colors. It doesn't matter to me. Well, have you had any skills or experience taking care of, you know, Mr. You know, James, you know, let's say James here. And really that there might be an attitudinal thing. Oh, I don't like this patient. This patient really, you know, there's some counter transference there of sort of feelings or ideas, or, you know, maybe the patient didn't like the resident in this case, the medical student even. And they'll tell us. I've had many patients tell me they don't like me, and how I deal with that, right? And that may actually impact my own ability, but it may actually trigger some conscious or unconscious racism. Also that we're in a system, right? We're usually not the first people to take care of this patient. They've had a history, they've been treated a certain way, they've been through a lot. I mean, I would say, you know, most of my patients take multiple buses to get to see me in clinic. And all those experiences accumulate. So by the time they see me, their blood pressure side, they always tell me that. They always say, well, doctor, every time I come here, my blood pressure side, but when I'm home, it's never high. There's a lot that goes on in that experience getting to see me in clinic, right? So really, there's so many different ways to approach teaching. And we end up being teachers. I mean, there's a whole article on how to be the 1-minute preceptor, and really asking people, well, tell me what you really think. What's going on? Commit to knowing, commit to telling me why you think this patient doesn't need a knee replacement or is refusing it. And really distinguish racism in this case from, it's not a good shortcut. It's not a good shortcut because of X and Y reasons. And also assign reading. There's plenty of reading now around anti-racism or experiences of people of color in healthcare. And you can assign that and say, hey, have you read this before? You should really read it, and then come back and we can have a discussion about what you really believe is true or untrue, right? So getting commitment, probing, what's your evidence, teaching some general rules. You might say, just because a patient refuses surgical care, ask them why. And in this case, I talked to a Black patient early in my career and asked them why. And they say, every time my neighbors get a knee replacement, they end up in these horrible nursing homes, and they actually end up worse, not better, with their knees. Think about that. And that's because our healthcare system is designed, and it has racist structures where we actually send people to homes, nursing homes that are actually inadequately funded, with inadequate supervision. And they actually don't have the necessary people, but also the systems to be able to really get people that get a knee replacement rehabilitated, right? And a lot of students may not know that, right? They may think, well, my family or where I come from, or the last time I took care of a patient, they went to an amazing nursing home. Why doesn't this patient want to do that? It's a lot there, right? It's really, we talk a lot about getting to know your patients and knowing their stories and really listening. That's part of anti-racism, is understanding beyond just what you think is correct. And we are taught in medical school that we're always right. And I'll tell you, more likely than not, we're always wrong. And patients always are the ones who are right. So really reinforcing, and what's right. I mean, maybe there was an attempt, and there was a shortcut too. Sometimes patients will take shortcuts. They'll say, I just don't want to talk to you. I don't care for you. I want the doctor to come in and take care of me. And that's a conversation to have. And that's a good conversation I've had many times as an attending physician, to ask my patients, tell me why you feel this way. Why don't you want my student to take care of you? And they'll share things that are very insightful. And we have to also hear that out. We can't take it personal as much as really understanding our patients and where they're coming from. And really it's about correcting mistakes. So there's a lot of literature on quality specific to Black patients, and really the limitations, and really that we don't do a good job. And if we don't do a good job, then how do we expect patients to trust us, to really care? We put them through so many historical challenges, and now all of a sudden, overnight, they're supposed to trust us. Overnight, they're supposed to take our advice. Overnight, they're supposed to just, communicate with us in a way that isn't, that they're protecting themselves. And you heard a little bit about that earlier. And this is clear. I mean, you can read the literature. I'd say there's too many studies talking about this. We probably need more studies talking about solutions. All right, so I'll ask for one more volunteer. So what happens here in terms of, well, actually, let me see. Yeah, anybody want to take this on just to humor me a little bit as we wrap up soon?
Yeah, I don't mind.
Okay.
Patients may decline surgery for many reasons. So it is important to understand each patient's decision. It is helpful to know that rates of joint replacement surgery in the US vary by patient race, ethnicity, gender, and geographic location. As a group, African American patients are less likely to report understanding joint replacement surgery than white patients, and are more likely to believe they will experience a lengthy, painful post-operative course. As a more general rule, it is always important to explore the reasons that a given patient refuses a treatment and to understand and address his specific concerns. Why don't you go back and ask the patient what concerns he may have about the surgery? And then we can discuss how to address them.
Yeah, and one modification here, again, I would say, and thank you so much, Sakia.
Yes.
Is that how you pronounce it?
Perfect. Yes.
Okay. Thank you so much. I would say as a group, we as healthcare professionals do a lousy job of teaching our patients about joint replacement, right? So see the subtleties even in this writing. And again, these were very well-intentioned doctors who put this together, right? But even then, they're showing and demonstrating to us that they're caught in a system that actually they're not able to see their own racist remarks, right? We blame the patient in this case. So I'm going to go back and edit this. Well, I'd have to talk to the authors. But just to give you an understanding, and many of you are going to probably hear this, and many of you are younger. And you're going to say, well, does this really happen? Too common, right? Too common. So there's some decision making, right? And we know there's a lot of great books out there around flawed decisions, that we as humans are so flawed in our decision making. So really challenging ourselves every single time. Why do I think this? Why do I believe this? Why does Instagram now dictate how I think, right? Social media is very powerful, but it can actually push you to think probably things that you don't want to think about, or it can push you to really question things that you think about. And how do we use that to our advantage is important, but also not to our disadvantage. I often see the opposite, right? That social media is actually teaching us and our kids, my kids, the wrong things, not the right things. Really feedback. So I just want to take us back to this picture and really bring us to where we are today. And at UltiMed, we were one of the first community health centers hit with the surge back in March. We're anticipating another one. We're getting ready. And we saw the injustices and inequities, specifically really concerned about our communities of color, specifically our Black community here in Southern California around COVID-19. And this is the picture that somebody would paint today. And I would say that the stances and the outcomes of what people are doing to people of color is tragic. To Black, to Mr. George Floyd, and really a senseless death on the hands of police officers. But more importantly, that in healthcare, we're not immune to this. And we have to be a lot more rigorous and challenging if we want to move to an anti-racist healthcare system. And we have to challenge not only care inside our 4 clinic walls, but also outside. And it's really refreshing to see that many of our associations are taking a stand, but many more have to do more. It's not just statements, it's actions. And it's really changing our entire educational system to really undo so much of the trauma and systems that they've designed that actually sometimes will blind us or you to racism. And so always, stay as, I would say, committed, but more importantly, challenge yourself. And really thank you for taking the time today to challenge yourself a little more. I know about 60, some of you today took the time to be with us and really hear from some powerful speakers. And really, again, that this isn't where it stops. We need to do more. And as one of the founders of Mi Mentor, I would continue to challenge us to even do more and more often so that we do lead together. Because changing these systems will take a long time, but together, not only is it funner, it's more rewarding, but it's also powerful to be able to change the world as we are today across multiple states and not just in one space, but many spaces. So thank you. I'm going to go ahead and end there. I was given the cue to stop. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much. That's it for all our speakers today. I want to say thank you to each and every one of you to taking time out of your day. I know you're all very busy.
Hey, this is Dr. Patton here. just wanted to say that I have a man crush on Dr. Talamantes. I actually followed him we've been following him for a while and have yet to reconnect down in LA. So I was happy to see him and hear all the other speakers as well, Dr. Arumala and of course Dr. Brown, my buddy. But I'm happy to answer any questions. Obviously, this may not be the platform anymore just because we're out of time. But if you guys have any questions that you'd like to have me answer, you can find me on my social media platforms. I respond to Instagram as well as just send me an email. But I would just say that you just try to remain encouraged and inspired. 2020 has been a year where we've all had to obviously take a long pause and sort of reflect and reevaluate, just about everything that we do and think. All the things that we're sort of used to doing, obviously we no longer able to do. And a lot of the things that plagued us are seeming to obviously only intensify in terms of the pressure that's felt only because of all the things that we're experiencing right now. And I would just say, don't lose hope. Don't let society or circumstances dictate what you can and cannot do. And I think Dr. Arumala really spoke to that well in her talk. And obviously Dr. Brown, I know his story. It's just really important because medicine needs you. No matter what, the statistics say, no matter what the odds say. I mean, I was told I would not be a physician by my counselors after my first 2 quarters of college because I didn't do well in the beginning, and I was a straight A student all the way through grade school, and I just struggled because of some circumstances. But here I am today, and I don't say that to toot my own horn, but just to suggest that an encounter like that can really deter someone from wanting to pursue this dream or goal and fulfill their destiny. So you just have to surround yourself with mentors. You don't want yes folks, people that are going to only tell you what you want to hear, but you do want people that are going to speak destiny into your ear. I think that's really, really important. Nobody gets to this point by themselves. We all had a lot of people who were, I don't know what religious beliefs everyone has, but I had folks who were praying for me, who mom and grandma that would not let me say no, or not let me, try to convince myself that maybe what I always felt was in my heart wasn't meant for me. So I think it's really important to surround yourself with those people, and they may not be family members, like people like us, maybe your mentor, it may be a horizontal relationship, someone who's only maybe a few classes ahead of you, or maybe at your same level that can serve in that role as well. But it's really important to make sure you surround yourself with people who can sort of look after you and really speak positive affirmations and just know that you can do it. I really feel bad, obviously, for all of y'all that are having to go through it right now with this pandemic and, having to interview virtually and not having the ability to apply because you can't take tests and all these. It's just crazy. But all this stuff will make you stronger. All this adversity will make you stronger. Speed bumps, not roadblocks. You know what I mean? Like fall down 7 times, get back 8 is what the Japanese proverb says, right? So you guys can, you all can do it. I believe in y'all. If no one ever told you that, I definitely will say that. It's not about how smart you are, although it definitely is important to do the best you can. It really comes down to how much will and determination you have to see yourself at the end, get to this point. So rooting for you. I really appreciate the opportunity to come on here and speak to y'all via Me Mentor. I really appreciate it. I love the work that y'all are doing. And like I said, if you have any questions or anything you want to talk to me on further from this point, you can find me on social media or shoot me an email.
I'll be fast. Huge fan of this organization in terms of what you've been able to accomplish and the promise that comes from this group. This makes me so happy to see. And also, I need every face that we see here represented in medicine. I need that to happen. I need there to be more representation, more presence, because the perspectives that you all bring are unique. They are underrepresented, and it helps to change the lens that we currently practice with. So I need that there. And then the last part I was going to say is every single talk that you got here today has nuggets in it, has like gems that are embedded. If it's available if it's recorded and made available, watch this again, like watch parts of this again. I really want to make sure that last lecture resonated with you all, guys. Like that is a high caliber lecture, something that educators still don't understand. and people who practice medicine right now still don't understand. And if you're in the process of trying to become the physician of tomorrow and you learn this now, it changes your trajectory. So I'm telling you to make this something that is a part of who you are and lead with this as a care provider. You'll give better care to patients, you'll change the way medicine is viewed, and you will actually be leaders in the space. So that's all I got.
Well, I think you guys have really summarized everything. So I'm only going to use one sentence, and that is, you are worth your dreams. You're worth your dreams.